My name is Nia. I am 35 years old and somehow still healing from wounds my family inflicted. As a successful software developer, I escaped their toxicity but maintained occasional contact. Last Sunday, they invited me to an upscale brunch to catch up. Between mimosas and avocado toast, my mother leaned forward, smirking. You know, Nia, you are lucky we even include you. Pity goes a long way. I simply sipped my coffee and smiled. That night, I logged in, disabled every family credit account, and emailed my lawyer about selling the cabin. But taking back my power and delivering that final blow did not happen overnight. To understand how I reached that point of ultimate freedom, we have to go back to the moment that shifted the balance of power forever. On Thanksgiving, everything felt like it was decided for me. My sister Charmaine got a brand new Porsche, and I was handed a $10 lottery ticket like an afterthought. But in a single moment of impossible luck, that ticket changed everything, turning me into a $310 million winner and rewriting my entire future. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. Growing up in Fairfield, Connecticut meant privilege to outsiders. But inside our sprawling colonial home, emotional coldness permeated every corner. Our four-bedroom house with its manicured lawn and heated swimming pool was a fortress of expectations I could never quite meet. My childhood bedroom, painted pale blue at my mother Elaine's insistence, despite my preference for green, became my sanctuary and prison. From elementary school through high school, I maintained straight-A grades, joined honor societies, and stayed out of trouble. But my achievements were always treated as the bare minimum. The celebrations, the warmth, and the unconditional pride were exclusively reserved for my younger sister, Charmaine. She was the golden child. She could fail a class and be rewarded with a shopping spree to ease her stress, while my academic awards were casually tossed onto the kitchen counter. This toxic dynamic did not magically fade when we became adults. It only became more expensive and far more damaging. I built my own life away from them, carving out a lucrative career in software development and securing my own financial independence. Yet the suffocating obligation of holiday gatherings always pulled me back. Which brings me to that unforgettable Thanksgiving. The autumn air was crisp and biting as I turned my reliable 7-year-old Honda Civic onto the familiar winding driveway of my parents' estate. I had spent all morning in my kitchen baking my grandmother's famous sweet potato pie from scratch, hoping against logic that this year might be different, that we could just have a peaceful, normal family dinner. But before I even put my car in park, the sound of piercing, high-pitched shrieks shattered the quiet suburban afternoon. I looked through my windshield and felt an immediate heavy knot form in my stomach. There, parked right in front of the grand oak double doors of the house, was a gleaming, pristine white Porsche Macan. A massive red velvet bow was strapped across the hood, catching the late afternoon sun. Charmaine and her husband Trey were jumping up and down on the paved driveway like they had just won the lottery. Charmaine was dressed in a designer silk outfit that likely cost more than my monthly mortgage, screaming and dramatically hugging the hood of the luxury vehicle. Trey, a man who constantly preached on the internet about his supposed billionaire mindset and cryptocurrency investments while secretly drowning in credit card debt, had his phone out. He was loudly narrating a live video for his social media followers, making sure everyone online knew just how blessed his wife was. He kept repeating buzzwords about generational wealth and manifesting luxury, completely ignoring the fact that my parents were the ones funding this illusion. I took a deep breath, picked up the warm pie from the passenger seat, and slowly stepped out of my car. The heavy front door swung open and my mother Elaine stepped out onto the porch. She was wearing her signature string of pearls and an impeccably tailored cashmere dress. She did not smile when she saw me. She did not say Happy Thanksgiving or ask how my drive was. She did not even acknowledge the pie I was carefully holding. Instead, she marched straight down the concrete steps, bypassed me completely to run her hand admiringly along the side of the Porsche, and then finally turned in my direction. Elaine reached into the deep pocket of her cardigan and pulled out a crinkled, slightly stained paper envelope. It looked like something she had dug out of the bottom of her purse at the absolute last minute. She extended her arm, holding it out to me with the casual indifference one might use to hand a promotional flyer to a stranger on the street. I balanced the heavy baking dish in one hand and took the envelope with the other. Inside was a single brightly colored $10 scratch-off lottery ticket. I looked at the cheap, flimsy piece of cardboard in my hand and then looked over at the $80,000 luxury vehicle sitting just a few feet away. The contrast was so blatantly absurd it almost felt like a scripted joke. "Do not make that face, Nia!" My mother snapped, her tone instantly defensive before I had even uttered a single syllable. "Charmaine needs a luxury car to drive her high-net-worth clients around. She is a luxury realtor now. You just sit in a cubicle looking at code and spreadsheets all day. You do not need anything fancy to impress anyone. Be a supportive sister for once in your life and just be happy for her blessing." The words hit me like a physical blow to the chest. A luxury realtor. Charmaine had not successfully closed on a single property in over 14 months. Her entire real estate career consisted of posting staged photos in empty houses she had absolutely no listing rights to, pretending she was closing million-dollar deals. Meanwhile, I was a senior software developer managing massive corporate projects. I was the one who had quietly paid off Charmaine's $40,000 student loan debt just 2 years ago, when collection agencies were calling the house threatening legal action. I was the one who funded my own college tuition entirely through scholarships and part-time jobs, while my parents happily paid for Charmaine to spend a year studying abroad in Europe. Yet here I was, standing in the cold, being told my life and my career were insignificant compared to her fabricated image. I wanted to scream. I wanted to drop the sweet potato pie right onto the immaculate driveway and loudly list every single financial sacrifice I had made to keep this family afloat. But I knew exactly how that script would play out. Elaine would immediately start crying. My father would rush out to preach about disrespect and honoring your parents. And I would instantly be branded as the jealous, bitter villain ruining the holy holiday. So I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper, and I chose silence. But my silence was not enough for them. Before I could even process the utter humiliation of the $10 lottery ticket, Trey jogged over. He did not bother to pause his live stream. He pointed his phone camera directly at my face, broadcasting my reaction to his hundreds of followers, then purposefully panned the lens down to my reliable, slightly scuffed Honda Civic. He let out a loud, theatrical laugh that echoed off the brick exterior of the house. "Hey, Nia Trey," sneered his voice dripping with unmistakable condescension. "Do me a huge favor and go park that junker down the street. You are going to completely ruin the aesthetic of our Thanksgiving photos. We cannot have that rusty bumper in the background when Charmaine posts her new blessing for the timeline. It throws off the whole luxury vibe we are going for today." The sheer audacity of his demand left me momentarily paralyzed. This man was currently living rent-free in a townhouse my parents helped pay for. He was standing next to a car my parents just bought for his wife. And yet he felt entirely comfortable ordering me off my own family's property. Charmaine looked over from the driver's side door, flipping her perfectly styled hair over her shoulder, and eagerly chimed in. "Yes, please, Nia. Just park it out by the community gates and walk back up. It really is a massive eyesore next to the Porsche, and we have a professional photographer coming in an hour to take family portraits. We just want everything to look perfect." I stood there on the pavement as the autumn wind whipped around me. The sweet potato pie was growing incredibly heavy in my hands, and the $10 lottery ticket was burning a hole in my coat pocket. I looked directly at my mother, silently waiting for her to intervene. I waited for her to tell Trey he was crossing a line to tell Charmaine to be respectful of her older sister. But Elaine simply nodded in total agreement, casually adjusting her pearl necklace. "Just move it, Nia," Elaine said smoothly without a trace of guilt. "It is a simple request. Do not cause drama today. We just want peace and positivity." I gripped the lottery ticket so tightly my fingernails left deep crescent moons in my palm. The urge to fight back raged inside me, but a strange, chilling calm suddenly washed over it. Arguing with them was a useless game I had played for 35 years, and I was finally done playing. I did not argue. I did not yell. I simply turned around in silence, opened my car door, and carefully placed the pie back onto the passenger seat. I got behind the wheel, started the engine, and backed my car entirely out of the driveway. I drove 2 blocks down the street, parked on the public curb, and began the long, freezing walk back to the house. As my heels clicked against the cold asphalt during that humiliating walk back to the estate, I listened to the faint sound of their laughter echoing through the trees. They thought they had put me in my place. They thought they had cemented the family hierarchy once and for all. But the universe has a brilliant sense of irony. They handed me a $10 scrap of paper to mock my financial status, completely unaware that they had just handed me the exact key to their absolute destruction. I stepped through the heavy oak doors of the estate, the manufactured warmth of the house doing absolutely nothing to thaw the ice forming in my chest. The dining room was a spectacle of excessive performative wealth. Crystal glasses caught the light of the grand chandelier, and sterling silver cutlery rested beside plates with hand-painted gold rims. Everyone was already seated, their laughter echoing off the high ceilings as they passed around appetizers. I quietly took my designated seat at the far end of the table near the swinging door that led to the kitchen. It was the seat usually reserved for the help or the youngest children, a physical manifestation of my standing in this family. No one asked why I was flushed from the cold walk. No one thanked me for the sweet potato pie that I placed on the sideboard. My father. Pastor David stood at the head of the table. He was an imposing man who wore his authority like a tailored suit. He cleared his throat, a deep, resonant sound that commanded immediate silence from his congregation and his family alike. "Let us bow our heads," my father boomed, lifting his hands in the air. "Lord, we come before you today with hearts full of gratitude. We thank you for the abundance you have showered upon this family. We thank you for the new blessings, the new vehicles of grace sitting in our driveway, and the success you have bestowed upon Charmaine and Trey." I kept my head bowed, my eyes fixed on the empty china plate in front of me. I knew my father's prayers. They were never just conversations with God. They were passive-aggressive sermons designed to manipulate the people in the room. "But Lord," my father continued, his voice dropping an octave into a tone of serious instruction, "we also know that to whom much is given, much is required. We know that true generational wealth is built on family sacrifice. We pray for those at this table who have been selfish, who have hoarded their blessings instead of pouring into the family legacy. We pray you soften their hardened hearts, Lord. We pray you show them that supporting their family's vision is the ultimate act of Christian love. Amen." A chorus of amens echoed around the table, led loudly by Elaine and Trey. I slowly raised my head. My father was looking directly at me, his eyes locked onto mine with a chilling intensity. The prayer was over, but the ambush was just beginning. "Nia," my father said, folding his hands on the table, "Trey and I had a very long, very productive meeting in my study this morning. He has been presented with an unbelievable opportunity. A digital currency platform that is guaranteed to yield a 500% return within the first quarter. This is the kind of aggressive financial move that elevates a family from comfortable to untouchable." Trey leaned forward, adjusting the cuffs of his expensive blazer. "It is a closed investment circle, Nia. Invite only. I have the network and the strategy, but the initial buy-in requires immediate liquid capital. It is a foolproof crypto venture. I am talking about securing our family name for the next century." I stared at Trey, utterly blank. "And what exactly does your crypto venture have to do with me?" My mother Elaine sighed loudly, rolling her eyes as if my ignorance was physically exhausting her. "Do not play dumb, Nia. You are the only one in the family without major overhead right now. You live alone in that tiny little condo. Your father and I discussed it. You are going to take out a second mortgage on your property. We only need you to pull out about $150,000 to cover Trey's buy-in. You will get it back with interest by spring. Consider it a blessing for the family legacy." The sheer audacity of the demand hit me so hard my vision actually blurred for a second. They were not asking. They were dictating. My father, a man who collected hundreds of thousands of dollars in tithes every Sunday And my mother, a woman dripping in diamonds, wanted me to leverage the only asset I owned to fund a high-risk digital scam run by a man who did not even have a steady paycheck. I looked at Charmaine. She was casually inspecting her manicure, completely unbothered by the fact that her husband was trying to gamble away my home. "No," I said. The word was quiet but absolute. The silence that followed was suffocating. My father's jaw tightened. Trey let out a breath of mock disbelief. "Excuse me," my father demanded, his voice rising. "Did you just say no to your family?" I said no. I repeated, my voice growing steadier, louder. "I am not taking out a second mortgage on my home so Trey can play Wolf of Wall Street with fake internet money. I am not risking the roof over my head for a crypto venture that sounds like a textbook Ponzi scheme." Trey slammed his hand on the table, rattling the crystal glasses. "Watch your mouth, Nia. You do not understand high-level investments. You are just a code monkey playing it safe. This is why you will always be stuck at the bottom. You have no vision." Vision. I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that startled even me. "Is that what we are calling it now? Let us talk about vision, Trey. Let us talk about family sacrifice." I turned my gaze directly to my mother and father. "Where is the return on the $40,000 of my savings you pressured me to invest in Charmaine's real estate licensing 2 years ago?" Charmaine's head snapped up, her face flushing a deep, angry red. "Keep my name out of your mouth, Nia." "No, let us talk about it." I pushed back, the years of suppressed rage finally spilling over. "You all sat at this exact same table and told me it was my Christian duty to support my sister. You said it was a guaranteed investment. I drained my savings account to pay for her luxury branding, her high-end photo shoots, and her marketing materials because she just had to look the part. And what happened? I never saw a single dime of that money again. She has not sold a single house, but she sure looks great in that new Porsche you just bought her, does she not?" The dining room erupted. The facade of the polite Holy Family shattered instantly. "How dare you bring that up today?" Elaine shrieked, standing up from her chair. She pointed a manicured finger right at my face. "You are so deeply jealous of your sister, it is sickening. You have always been bitter. Charmaine is building a brand. That takes time. You holding that money over her head just proves how unchristian and wicked your heart truly is." "She is a hater," Trey yelled over the commotion. "She cannot stand seeing us win." My father slammed his fist down, silencing the room. "Enough!" He glared at me, his eyes filled with absolute disgust. "You have brought nothing but dark, toxic energy into this house since you walked through the door. You disrespect my authority, you insult your sister, and you refuse to uplift your family. If you cannot sit at this table with a spirit of generosity and obedience, then you do not deserve to sit at this table at all." He was kicking me out of the dining room. "At Thanksgiving dinner. Since you clearly do not want to be a part of this family's future," my mother sneered. "You can make yourself useful in the present. The kitchen is a mess. Go clear the counters and start washing the prep dishes. We will call you when we are ready for dessert. If you are lucky." I sat there for a fraction of a second, absorbing the ultimate humiliation. I was an educated, successful 35-year-old woman, and they were dismissing me to the kitchen like a misbehaving servant. The rage inside me was so intense, it felt like physical heat, but beneath the rage was a profound, chilling clarity. They would never change. I would never be enough. I was nothing but a resource to be drained and discarded. Without a single word, I stood up from the table. I did not look at any of them. I turned my back on the opulent dining room, pushed through the heavy wooden swinging door, and let it shut firmly behind me. The kitchen was starkly different from the dining room. It was quiet, brightly lit, and cluttered with the messy aftermath of Elaine's catered holiday prep. Stacks of greasy pots, dirty mixing bowls, and crusted serving spoons filled the deep stainless steel sink. The sound of my family's muffled laughter and clinking glasses seeped through the door, a cruel reminder of my isolation. I walked over to the sink, turned on the faucet, and let the scalding hot water run over my trembling hands. I grabbed a sponge and began aggressively scraping the hardened food off a heavy ceramic baking dish. My chest heaved with unshed tears, but I refused to cry. Crying was a luxury I could not afford in this house. As I scrubbed, my hand brushed against the deep pocket of my coat hanging on the back of a nearby chair. I felt the sharp edge of the stiff paper, the $10 lottery ticket, the final insult of the day. I dropped the sponge into the soapy water. I dried my hands on a dish towel and pulled the crinkled envelope out of my pocket. I stared at the brightly colored cardboard. It was a holiday-themed scratch-off promising massive cash prizes with bold, obnoxious lettering. It was trash. It was a slap in the face. It was Elaine's way of saying my worth amounted to a piece of gas station cardboard. A sudden wave of pure destructive anger washed over me. I wanted to tear it into pieces. I wanted to march back out there and throw the confetti of torn paper right into my mother's face. Instead, I reached into the utensil drawer and pulled out a heavy silver coin. I slammed the ticket down onto the Marble Island counter. I pressed the edge of the coin into the thick silver foil covering the play area. I scratched violently, aggressively, not even caring about the rules of the game. I just wanted to destroy the silver coating. I scratched the first row, then the second. Silver dust flew across the pristine marble. I stopped, my breath hitched in my throat. I blinked, rubbing my eyes to clear the angry tears that had finally surfaced. I looked closer at the ticket under the bright kitchen pendant lights. The numbers matched. I scanned the prize key at the bottom. I scanned the matching numbers again, one by one. They aligned perfectly with the jackpot sequence. $310 million. The numbers blurred, then sharpened, then blurred again. I stood frozen over the marble kitchen island, the silver shavings from the scratch-off ticket clinging to my damp fingers. My brain completely short-circuited, unable to process the astronomical figure printed in plain black ink. 3, 1, 0, followed by a cascading waterfall of zeros. It was a jackpot so massive it felt entirely fictional. My heart began to hammer against my ribs like a trapped bird. The kitchen walls seemed to recede the ambient noise of the house, fading into a high-pitched ringing in my ears. I reached out and gripped the edge of the granite countertop to steady myself. This was not a joke. This was not a printing error. The security watermark gleamed faintly under the pendant lights. I had just won $310 million. A massive, uncontrollable wave of adrenaline surged through my veins. The urge to scream, to laugh, to run out into the dining room and slam the ticket down onto my father's pristine china plate was almost overpowering. I opened my mouth, a gasp of pure euphoria rising in my throat. I was going to throw this in their faces. I was going to show my mother just how valuable her discarded piece of trash truly was. But before a single sound could escape my lips, a sharp, angry whisper drifted through the partially open kitchen window. "Keep your voice down, Trey," my father hissed. "Do you want the entire house to hear you?" I instantly snapped my mouth shut. The euphoria vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp spike of adrenaline. The kitchen window was cracked open just a few inches to let out the heat from the ovens. Through the narrow gap, I could see the dimly lit stone patio. The autumn wind carried their hushed, frantic voices directly into the kitchen with crystal clarity. I slowly backed away from the bright island lights, slipping into the shadows near the refrigerator, straining to hear every word. "I am keeping my voice down." Pops Trey shot back his usual arrogant drawl, replaced by a desperate, tight pitch. "But you are the one who is not understanding the timeline here. The dealer needed the cash wired directly. They do not take crypto promises for a custom Porsche Macan. I had to secure the asset today to keep Charmaine's brand looking legitimate." "You did not secure an asset," Trey, my father growled, the sound of his heavy dress shoes pacing across the stone pavers. "You committed theft. You pulled $50,000 out of the church building fund. Do you have any idea what the deacon board will do if they find out I authorized a wire transfer to a luxury car dealership instead of the roofing contractors? That money was supposed to fix the sanctuary leaks." I pressed my hand over my mouth, my eyes widening in absolute horror. The church building fund. The $50,000 my father had spent the last 3 Sundays begging the congregation to donate. Elderly women on fixed incomes had written checks to fix that roof. And Trey had used it to buy Charmaine a car, just so she could flex on the internet. "It is just a temporary loan," Pops Trey pleaded, his voice dripping with sleazy desperation. It is leverage, and we have the perfect solution sitting right inside the dining room. Once Nia takes out that second mortgage on her condo, we will have 150,000 in liquid cash. I will put the 50,000 right back into the church account by Monday morning. The deacon board will never even know it was gone. My blood ran ice cold. The conversation at the dinner table was not about investing in a crypto venture. It was never about building family wealth. It was a desperate, calculated shakedown to cover up their embezzlement. They were going to use my home, my credit, and my hard-earned equity to replace the money they stole from a church. And what if she refuses? My father demanded. You saw her out there. She is stubborn. She is bitter. She does not respect my authority the way Charmaine does. If Naya does not sign those mortgage papers, the annual audit is going to flag the missing 50,000 by the end of next month. She will sign, Trey said confidently. Elaine knows exactly which buttons to push. We will freeze her out. We will threaten to cut her out of the grandmother's estate. Nia is desperate for your approval. She always has been. She will cave. But even if the audit happens early, we still have the ultimate insurance policy. Insurance policy, my father asked, his pacing stopping. What are you talking about? Nia is a senior forensic accountant. Trey said, his voice dropping into a sinister conspiratorial whisper. She literally tracks missing money for a living. If the deacon board notices the discrepancy, we just tell them we hired Nia to manage the church finances this quarter to save on accounting fees. We give her the ledgers. We make her fix it. Make her fix it how my father asked, hesitating. She can cook the books, Pops. She knows how to move numbers around better than anyone. And if she refuses to cover it up, or if the board brings in an outside auditor, who do you think they are going to blame? The beloved charismatic pastor? Or the disgruntled secular daughter who had unrestricted access to the accounts and a sudden need for cash? A heavy, sickening silence fell over the patio. I stopped breathing. I waited for my father, a man of God, to strike Trey down. I waited for him to express outrage at the idea of framing his own flesh and blood for a federal crime. Instead, my father let out a long, heavy sigh. It is a massive risk, Trey. But if it comes down to protecting the ministry and protecting this family's name, we do what we have to do. Just make sure Elaine keeps the pressure on her tonight. We need those mortgage documents signed by Friday. I stepped back from the window, my legs trembling so violently I had to lean against the cold steel of the refrigerator. The reality of what I had just heard crashed down on me, shattering every lingering illusion I had about my family. They were not just toxic, they were not just narcissistic or emotionally abusive. They were active, calculated criminals. They were committing felony wire fraud. And they had already mapped out a plan to use me as their designated fall guy to avoid federal prison. They were willing to destroy my career, my freedom, and my entire life just to maintain their fake, luxurious image. All those years of trying to be the perfect daughter. All those years of paying off Charmaine's debts, enduring their insults, and sitting quietly at the end of the table. It meant absolutely nothing to them. I was not a daughter. I was collateral damage waiting to happen. I looked back down at the Marble Island counter. The scratch-off ticket was still sitting there, surrounded by silver dust. $310 million. 10 minutes ago, I was a victim. I was the scapegoat daughter crying over dirty dishes while my family mocked me. But right now, standing in the quiet kitchen with the winning numbers staring back at me, a profound, irreversible shift occurred deep within my soul. The sadness evaporated. The desperate need for their validation vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating, and ruthless clarity. They thought they had me trapped. They thought they could back me into a financial corner and force me to take the fall for their greed. They had absolutely no idea who they were dealing with. They forgot that I was a forensic accountant. I spent 40 hours a week dismantling corporate frauds and tracing hidden assets. I knew exactly how to move money, how to hide money, and how to financially ruin people who thought they were untouchable. I walked back over to the counter. I picked up the $10 ticket, handling it as carefully as if it were made of fragile glass. I folded it precisely in half, then in half again. I reached into my blouse and slipped the thick folded cardboard deep inside my bra, pressing it securely against my heart. It felt like a shield. It felt like a loaded weapon. I took a deep, steadying breath. I smoothed down my clothes. I wiped the remaining silver dust off the counter and tossed the coin back into the drawer. When I looked up at my reflection in the dark glass of the oven door, the woman staring back at me was entirely different. The timid, eager-to-please daughter was dead. She died the moment my father agreed to frame her. I pushed open the swinging kitchen door and walked right back into the opulent dining room. The conversation immediately stopped. All eyes turned to me. Elaine sneered, ready to hurl another insult. Trey smirked clearly, preparing to push the mortgage demand again. My father looked at me with cold, calculating eyes, sizing up his perfect fall guy. I smiled. It was a genuine, terrifyingly calm smile. "I am done with the dishes," I announced, my voice smooth and perfectly steady. "I am going to head home now. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving." I did not wait for their response. I walked straight out the front door, leaving them sitting at their lavish table, completely oblivious to the fact that their entire empire had just been marked for absolute destruction. The game had fundamentally changed, and they were about to lose absolutely everything they had ever built. Monday morning arrived with a crisp, unforgiving chill, but my mind had never been clearer. For the first time in my entire life, I did not wake up with that familiar heavy dread weighing down my chest. I did not check my phone to see if my mother had sent a passive-aggressive text, and I did not worry about my father's manufactured crises. Instead, I put on my sharpest charcoal blazer, grabbed my briefcase, and drove my 7-year-old Honda Civic straight into the heart of downtown Atlanta. The skyline gleamed against the bright winter sun, a towering monument to money, power, and secrets. As a senior forensic accountant, I had spent the last decade unraveling the complex webs of corporate fraud, tracking hidden offshore accounts, and dismantling the financial lies of corrupt executives. I knew exactly how the wealthy hid their assets. Now it was my turn to use that exact same playbook. I parked in the underground garage of a sleek glass skyscraper and took the private elevator up to the top floor. I was not there to audit anyone. I was there to hire the most ruthless, ironclad wealth management firm in the state of Georgia. Walking into the mahogany-paneled conference room of Sterling and Vance Financial, I felt a surge of pure electric confidence. A team of 4 elite attorneys and 2 senior wealth managers sat across from me, their tailored suits radiating expensive authority. They were used to dealing with high-net-worth individuals, but when I carefully placed the winning lottery ticket onto the polished table, the room fell into a stunned, heavy silence. $310 million. In the state of Georgia, lottery winners have the legal right to remain completely anonymous, but only if the claim is structured flawlessly. I did not just want anonymity, I wanted an impenetrable financial fortress. Sitting in a high-backed leather chair, I instructed them to establish a blind trust, which we named the November Equities Trust. Under this legal umbrella, they would set up a series of anonymous holding companies to manage the fund's purchase assets and execute investments without my name ever appearing on a single public document. Every transaction would be shielded by attorney-client privilege and corporate veils. I signed the dense legal paperwork, paid their exorbitant retainer fee up front using a cashier's check, and walked out of the building. By Wednesday afternoon, the Georgia Lottery Corporation had verified the ticket and processed the claim. After taxes, a staggering lump sum of $180 million was wired directly into the secure accounts of the November Equities Trust. I was a $100 millionaire, and nobody in my family had a clue. I went back to my corporate cubicle, drank the same awful office coffee, and continued driving my aging Civic, quietly waiting for my family to make their next move. I did not have to wait long. On Thursday morning, exactly 1 week after Thanksgiving, my cell phone began to vibrate violently across my desk. I glanced at the glowing screen. It was Charmaine. I let it ring 3 times before calmly pressing the green accept button. I did not even get the chance to say hello before her piercing, hysterical voice blasted through the speaker. "Nia, you need to send me $5,000 right now!" Charmaine screamed, the sound of frantic background noise echoing behind her. I could hear the distinct sound of heavy hangers scraping against metal clothing racks and the hushed, judgmental whispers of sales associates. I am standing in the middle of Phipps Plaza. and my black card just got declined at the register. The cashier is looking at me like I am some kind of peasant. This is completely humiliating. Send me the money through the Cash App immediately so I can pay for these bags and get out of here. I leaned back in my ergonomic office chair, staring at the complex spreadsheet on my monitor. I took a slow, deep breath, savoring the absolute absurdity of her demand. Charmaine, I said, keeping my voice intentionally flat and entirely devoid of emotion. Why on earth would I send you $5,000? Because my card is locked, she shrieked, as if that explained everything perfectly. Trey said the bank froze our accounts this morning over some stupid security flag. It is probably just a glitch with his crypto portfolio, but I have a showing with a massive client tomorrow and I need this outfit. Just send the money, Nia. Stop being so difficult. The bank did not freeze your accounts over a glitch, Charmaine, I thought to myself. The bank froze your accounts because your husband stole $50,000 from a church building fund, blew it on a car, and triggered a massive fraud alert. But I kept that explosive information locked tightly away in my mind. I am not sending you a dime, I replied calmly. Call your husband. Call your mother. They are the ones funding your luxury lifestyle. Do not call me to finance your shopping sprees. I was about to hang up the phone when her tone abruptly shifted from frantic whining to vicious entitlement. You owe me, Nia. You ruined Thanksgiving dinner with your selfish, bitter attitude. You embarrassed Dad in front of everyone. The least you can do is help me out of a minor bind. Besides, it is not just the clothes. The dealership is demanding proof of premium insurance for the Porsche before they finalize the title, and the custom rims Trey ordered need an immediate deposit. It is $15,000 total. Dad said you have excellent credit. We need you to co-sign a quick personal loan. Just put your name on the paper, and Trey will pay the monthly installments. The sheer audacity of the request was breathtaking. They had kicked me out of the dining room, insulted my career, and plotted to frame me for a federal crime. Yet here she was demanding I leverage my flawless credit score to insure the very car they bought with stolen church funds. It was a masterclass in narcissistic delusion. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper. You want me to co-sign a $15,000 loan for a Porsche that I was explicitly told to park my own car away from because my vehicle ruined your aesthetic? You want me to take on severe financial debt for your husband who is currently broke, to fund a lifestyle neither of you can actually afford? It is called supporting your family, Nia, she snapped back defensively. It is an investment in my brand. An investment, I repeated, letting out a sharp, humorless laugh that echoed in my empty office. Just like the $40,000 of my savings you pressured me to invest in your real estate career 2 years ago. The money I never saw again. The money you spent on lavish vacations and designer shoes instead of building a legitimate business. I am not your bank, Charmaine. I am not your safety net, and I am absolutely not co-signing a loan for your car. The line went silent for a few long seconds. When Charmaine spoke again, the spoiled, whining tone was completely gone, replaced by a cold, calculated cruelty that she had clearly inherited straight from our father. You are making a massive mistake, Nia, Charmaine sneered, her voice dropping lower into a menacing register. Dad told me you would act exactly like this. He said you would be stubborn and selfish. That is why they already came up with a backup plan. If you do not sign those loan papers by tomorrow afternoon, Dad is going to officially cut you out of Big Mama's house. My breath caught in my throat. Big Mama was our late grandmother, the only person in our entire family who had ever shown me genuine, unconditional love. Before she passed away, she left her beautiful, historic Victorian home in the family trust, explicitly stating that it was to be shared equally among her grandchildren as a foundation of generational wealth. It was a stunning property with wraparound porches and stained glass windows sitting on 2 acres of prime Atlanta real estate. But more importantly, it was the only piece of my family history that actually held any positive emotional value for me. My father, acting as the executor of the trust, held the legal power to amend the beneficiaries if he deemed it necessary. He would not do that, I said, testing her, wanting to hear exactly how far they were willing to go to destroy me. That house was Big Mama's legacy. She wanted us both to have it. Dad is the executor. Charmaine laughed a cruel, triumphant sound that made my blood run cold. He can do whatever he wants. And he already drafted the paperwork with his lawyer this morning. He said a daughter who refuses to sacrifice for her family does not deserve to inherit the family legacy. So you have a choice, Nia. You can either stop being a bitter loser and co-sign the loan for my Porsche, or you can say goodbye to Big Mama's house forever. I will take full ownership, and I'm going to gut the entire place and flip it to a commercial developer for a massive profit. She expected me to cry. She expected me to panic, to beg to cave in just like I always did when they held the things I loved hostage. She expected the old Nia to surrender. But the old Nia died on Thanksgiving night. The woman on the phone holding $180 million in an airtight blind trust did not feel fear. She felt a cold, surgical thrill. Charmaine thought she was delivering a checkmate, completely unaware that she had just handed me the exact weapon I needed to tear their entire world apart. "Do whatever you have to do, Charmaine," I said, my voice eerily calm and steady. I hung up the phone before she could say another word. I immediately opened a secure encrypted browser on my office computer and typed in the direct contact information for my new wealth manager at November Equities. Charmaine wanted to play a high-stakes game with Big Mama's house. It was time to show her what real financial power actually looked like. I stared at the glowing monitor, the cursor blinking rhythmically on the encrypted portal of November Equities. Just as I reached for my desk phone to initiate the call, my cell phone vibrated violently against the wood grain of my desk. It was not a phone call this time. It was a rapid, endless succession of text message notifications. I unlocked the screen and opened the application. The notifications were pouring into the massive extended family group chat, ironically named the Blessed Family Circle. This chat included my parents, Charmaine Trey, and over 24 aunts, uncles, and older cousins. It was the digital town square of our family, the place where gossip was disguised as prayer requests and achievements were weaponized to establish the pecking order. The screen was completely dominated by a massive wall of text from my father. Pastor David had decided to drop a nuclear bomb in front of the entire family. He did not call me to discuss this privately. He did not seek counsel. He wanted a public execution. I sat back in my chair, my heart rate steady, and began to read his grand, manipulative manifesto. To my beloved family, the message began dripping with artificial sorrow. It is with a heavy and grieving heart that Elaine and I must share some painful news regarding Nia. As your pastor and your patriarch, I have always preached that true generational wealth is built on a foundation of unity, sacrifice, and Christian love. We are called to uplift one another in times of need. Unfortunately, Nia has allowed a spirit of extreme greed, jealousy, and rebellion to take root in her heart. This week, our dear Charmaine faced an unexpected financial hurdle threatening her new luxury real estate business. Instead of offering a helping hand, Nia responded with vicious cruelty. She flatly refused to support her sister and mocked our family values. She has officially turned her back on God and this family. Because she has chosen to operate with such a selfish, independent spirit, Elaine and I have made a difficult but necessary executive decision. As the sole executor of the family trust, I am officially stripping Nia of her inheritance regarding Big Mama's historic estate. A daughter who refuses to sacrifice for her bloodline does not deserve to inherit the sacred fruits of our ancestors. We ask that you all pray for her soul. I read the message twice. The sheer level of gaslighting was almost artistic. He completely omitted the fact that the financial hurdle was a stolen luxury vehicle. He omitted the fact that Trey was committing felony wire fraud. He spun a narrative that cast him as a righteous, grieving father, forced to make a tough call, and painted me as a wicked, jealous monster hoarding my wealth while my poor sister suffered. Before I could even process the absolute absurdity of his statement, the dog pile began. The extended family, who always treated my father like a literal messenger from heaven, immediately chimed in to pledge their blind allegiance. Aunt Denise, my mother's older sister, who had not held a steady job in a decade, was the first to reply. "I am so sorry, David and Elaine. We have always known Nia had a cold heart. She always thought she was better than the rest of us, just because she moved away and got that corporate job, praying for her deliverance." Uncle George followed seconds later. Absolutely disgraceful. Big Mama would be turning in her grave if she knew Nia was acting like this. You made the right call, David. You cannot reward that kind of toxic independence. Cut the dead weight and focus on Charmaine. Charmaine actually respects her elders. The notifications kept rolling in. Cousin after cousin, aunt after aunt, all rushing to validate my father and condemn me. They talked about how ungrateful I was. They talked about the sacrifices my parents supposedly made for me. They weaponized Big Mama's memory, twisting the legacy of a kind, loving woman to justify their own toxic groupthink. They thought this public shaming would break me. They thought seeing myself excommunicated by 30 different relatives would send me into a spiral of panic and apologies. In the past, they would have been right. I would have called my father sobbing, begging him not to take away my connection to Big Mama, promising to sign whatever he wanted, just to make the collective anger stop. But sitting in my office today, I felt absolutely nothing but a profound, icy liberation. The worst thing they could possibly do to me was abandon me, and they had just done it voluntarily. They had handed me the scissors to cut the cord. I tapped the text box at the bottom of the screen. I did not type out a defense. I did not explain the stolen church funds or the $15,000 loan. I did not waste a single syllable trying to convince people who were fully committed to misunderstanding me. I typed one single word. Understood. I hit send. Then I permanently exited the group chat, blocked every single number associated with my extended family, and placed my cell phone face down on the desk. The digital silence in my office was deafening and beautiful. I immediately picked up my secure office phone and dialed the direct line to Mr. Sterling, the senior partner at November Equities. He answered on the second ring, his voice crisp and professional. "Good morning, Nia," Mr. Sterling said. "How can November Equities assist you today?" "Good morning, Mr. Sterling," I replied, pulling up a specific financial dossier on my monitor. "I have an urgent, highly confidential acquisition request. I need the trust to purchase two specific portfolios of distressed commercial and residential debt, and I need the acquisitions finalized by the end of the business week." "Tell me the target assets," he said, the sound of a heavy pen clicking on his end of the line. I read off the exact address of my father's massive megachurch on the south side of Atlanta, followed by the address of Big Mama's historic Victorian estate. Because of my background in forensic accounting, I had quietly run a deep background check on my father's financial holdings 3 years ago when he first started pressuring me for money. I knew his secrets. I knew that my father was completely obsessed with maintaining the image of a wealthy, untouchable pastor. To fund his tailored suits, his luxury vacations with my mother, and his constant financial bailouts for Charmaine, he had secretly remortgaged Big Mama's fully paid-off house to the absolute maximum limit. He had also taken out massive predatory commercial loans against the church property. He was drowning in debt. The church was bleeding money, and the mortgages on both properties had been in severe default for over 90 days. The banks were actively preparing to initiate the foreclosure process. I want the trust to approach the lenders holding the primary mortgages on those two properties. I instructed, my voice entirely steady. They are severely underperforming loans. The banks are highly motivated to offload the toxic debt off their balance sheets before the end of the quarter. Offer to buy the promissory notes entirely in cash at a slight premium above the current distressed market value. Do it through one of our anonymous holding companies. Do not negotiate. Just hand them the cash and take immediate assignment of the mortgages. Mr. Sterling paused for a brief moment, clearly running the mental calculations. Purchasing defaulted debt is a highly aggressive move, Nia. Once the trust acquires those promissory notes, you effectively step into the shoes of the bank. You will hold all the legal rights of the primary creditor. You will have the absolute power to demand immediate payment in full, or you can instantly trigger the foreclosure and auction process on both properties. That is exactly the point, Mr. Sterling, I said, looking out the window at the sprawling Atlanta skyline. I want the debt. I want the leverage. I want total control over those properties. Consider it done, he replied efficiently. With the liquid capital currently sitting in your trust accounts, buying out these two mortgages will be a simple administrative transaction. We will deploy our real estate acquisition team immediately. The banks will be thrilled to take the cash. I will have the final assignment of mortgage documents ready for your review in 48 hours. Thank you, I said. And Mr. Sterling, absolute anonymity. The current debtors cannot know that the debt has been sold to a private entity until the paperwork is entirely locked in. You have my word, he said, before disconnecting the line. I slowly placed the receiver back onto the cradle. A slow, deeply satisfied smile spread across my face. My father thought he was a strategic genius. He thought he could use Big Mama's house as a weapon to force me into financial submission. He thought he could strip me of my inheritance with a single text message and make me a pariah in my own family. He was completely oblivious to the legal reality of his situation. He did not own Big Mama's house anymore. The bank owned it. And by Friday afternoon, I was going to own the bank. I was not just reclaiming my inheritance. I was buying the very ground they walked on. I was about to become their landlord, their primary creditor, and the absolute architect of their financial destruction. The trap was officially set, and they were walking right into it, blindly arrogant and completely unaware of the storm gathering directly over their heads. Friday evening arrived with a brutal torrential downpour that turned the streets of Atlanta into slick gray rivers. My wealth manager, Mr. Sterling, had just sent the encrypted confirmation to my private server. The acquisition was officially complete. The November Equities Trust was now the sole legal owner of the defaulted mortgages for both Big Mama's historic estate and my father's sprawling megachurch. I held their entire world in the palm of my hand. I could have instructed my lawyers to send the foreclosure notices, right then ending the game with a clinical corporate strike. But as I watched the heavy rain lash against my office window, a lingering, nagging question tugged at the back of my mind. Was there even a fraction of an ounce of genuine parental love left in that house? If I had truly lost everything, if I was completely broken and destitute, would my mother and father open their door to their own flesh and blood? I decided to give them one final definitive test. I needed to look them in the eye and give them one last opportunity to choose their daughter over their suffocating pride. I left my office and drove my aging Honda Civic back to my condo. I changed out of my tailored corporate suit and put on a pair of faded sweatpants, a worn-out college hoodie, and an oversized cheap rain jacket. I grabbed a heavy-duty black plastic trash bag from the kitchen pantry and threw in a random assortment of old clothes, making it look as bulky and desperate as possible. I left my wallet, my jewelry, and my car keys on the kitchen counter, taking only my cell phone securely zipped in my waterproof inner pocket. I ordered a standard rideshare and had the driver drop me off at the main entrance of my parents' gated community. The sky had opened up completely. Freezing sheets of rain pelted my face as I walked the half-mile from the security gate to their sprawling estate. By the time I reached their massive stone driveway, I was drenched to the bone. My sneakers squished loudly with every single step, and the black trash bag slung over my shoulder felt heavy and pathetic. The mansion looked like a glowing fortress of warmth and luxury against the dark, stormy night. Golden light spilled from the massive arched windows, and I could see the faint silhouettes of people moving comfortably inside the grand living room. I walked up the wide concrete steps, my heart pounding a steady rhythm against my ribs, and pressed the glowing brass doorbell. It took nearly 2 full minutes before the heavy oak door finally swung inward. My mother, Elaine, stood in the grand foyer. She was wearing a pristine white silk loungewear set, casually holding a crystal glass of expensive red wine. The warm air from the house washed over my freezing face, carrying the rich scent of catered food and expensive vanilla candles. Elaine stopped dead in her tracks. Her eyes darted from my soaking wet hair down to the muddy sneakers ruining her immaculate welcome mat, and finally landed on the black trash bag, dripping rainwater onto the stone porch. She did not reach out. She did not gasp in concern. She did not ask if I was hurt or in trouble. Her face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated disgust. "Mom," I said, making my voice tremble, playing the part of the broken, defeated daughter perfectly. "I need help. I need a place to stay. Just for a little while." "What on earth are you doing here?" Nia, Elaine snapped, taking a very deliberate step backward to ensure the rainwater splashing off my jacket did not touch her silk outfit. Have you completely lost your mind coming here looking like a vagrant? You are tracking mud everywhere. I lost everything. I stammered, wrapping my arms tightly around myself as a gust of freezing wind whipped across the open porch. I was fired from my accounting firm yesterday afternoon. They escorted me out of the building. The bank called the loan on my condo because I missed the restructuring payments. They foreclosed on it this morning and locked the doors. I have absolutely nothing left. My accounts are overdrawn. I have exactly $0 to my name. Please, Mom, I just need to sleep in the basement tonight. I waited for the maternal instinct to finally kick in. I waited for her to drop the wine glass, pull me inside out of the dangerous storm, and tell me that everything would be okay because I was home. Instead, Elaine's eyes hardened into cold, unsympathetic stones. She reached out and grabbed the brass handle of the heavy door, pulling it slightly closer to her body to physically block the entrance to the foyer. You think you can just bring your bad energy and your absolute failure into my house? Elaine hissed, her voice dripping with venom. You made your bed on Thanksgiving, Nia. You explicitly chose not to support this family when Charmaine needed you. You act so high and mighty with your corporate job and your independent lifestyle, and now look at you, standing on my porch like a beggar. Pastor David is hosting the mayor and several prominent city council members here tomorrow morning for a televised prayer breakfast. Do you have any idea how it would look if they saw my eldest daughter sleeping in the basement out of a garbage bag? You are an absolute embarrassment to the family brand. The sound of Elaine's raised voice drew an eager audience. Charmaine and Trey appeared in the grand foyer, walking up right behind my mother. Charmaine was wearing designer silk pajamas, holding her meticulously groomed Pomeranian dog. Trey had a snifter of amber brandy in his hand, looking incredibly comfortable and arrogant in the house that I technically now owned. What is going on out here? Charmaine asked, peering over Elaine's shoulder. She let out a loud theatrical gasp when she saw me standing in the freezing rain. Oh my God, Nia. What is that smell? Are you literally holding a trash bag? Your sister apparently got fired and lost her little condo, Elaine said dismissively, not even turning her head to look at Charmaine. She expects us to just open our doors and fix her life after she deliberately turned her back on us. Trey let out a loud, barking laugh. He stepped past Elaine, pushing the heavy oak door open a little wider. He looked me up and down, his eyes gleaming with malicious satisfaction. The man who had stolen $50,000 from a church charity fund was now looking down on me for pretending to be poor. Well, 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 Trey sneered, taking a slow, dramatic sip of his brandy. Look who finally fell off her high horse. You know, Nia, this is exactly what happens when you operate with a severe poverty mindset. You hoard your little bits of cash instead of investing in the family vision, and the universe punishes you for it. You should be thanking us for this harsh lesson. I stood there shivering violently, staring directly into the cold eyes of the people I had spent my entire life trying to please. I am your family, I whispered, delivering my final line of the test. I have nowhere else to go. We are not a charity, Charmaine snapped aggressively, stepping forward. You told me to figure it out when my credit card was declined at the mall. So guess what, Nia? Figure it out. Trey stepped entirely out onto the covered porch. He reached out, grabbed the heavy plastic trash bag from my frozen fingers, and forcefully hurled it over the stone railing. It landed with a loud, sickening splash in the deep mud of my mother's prized rose garden. Bootstraps. Nia. Trey laughed, a cruel, echoing sound that cut right through the howling wind. That is the billionaire mindset. Pick yourself up. Without another word, Trey stepped back inside the warm foyer. Elaine looked at me one last time, her expression completely devoid of any human empathy or regret. She pulled the heavy oak door shut. I heard the solid, heavy metallic click of the deadbolt locking securely into place. I was left standing entirely alone on the freezing stone porch. The rain continued to fall in heavy, violent sheets, but the shivering suddenly stopped. The desperate tears that I had forced into my eyes for the performance instantly dried up. I did not feel broken. I did not feel abandoned. I felt a surge of raw power so intense it radiated through my chest like a physical fire. The final test was officially over. They had failed spectacularly, flawlessly, and without a single moment of hesitation. They had looked at their eldest daughter stripped of all her financial usefulness and corporate value and tossed her out into the mud. I walked calmly down the wide concrete steps, completely ignoring the fake trash bag rotting in the flooded rose garden. I reached into the dry inner pocket of my rain jacket and pulled out my cell phone. I bypassed the rideshare applications entirely. I opened my encrypted messaging app and sent a single precise location pin to my private security team. I stood at the very end of the long driveway, letting the freezing rain wash away the last remaining traces of the loyal, obedient daughter I used to be. Less than 4 minutes later, the blinding LED headlights of a massive vehicle pierced through the dark storm. A pristine, matte black Maybach glided silently up to the curb, its wide tires hissing against the wet asphalt. A man in a sharp black suit immediately stepped out of the front passenger seat, with a massive golf umbrella holding it carefully over my head as he opened the heavy rear door. I slid into the heated, luxurious leather interior of the cabin, the rich smell of new leather and expensive mahogany instantly replacing the cold stench of the storm. As the driver smoothly accelerated away from the gated community, I looked back at the glowing windows of the mansion through the tinted privacy glass. They were probably inside right now, laughing at my misery, drinking their expensive wine, and congratulating themselves on establishing their harsh boundaries. They had absolutely no idea that they had just slammed the door on the person who held the deed to their entire existence. The time for tests was officially over. Tomorrow morning, the real consequences were going to arrive on their doorstep. 3 weeks passed since that freezing night on my parents' front porch. For 21 days, I did not receive a single text message, phone call, or email from anyone in my family. They were entirely convinced that they had successfully discarded me. They assumed I was sleeping on a friend's couch, desperately trying to scrape together enough pennies to survive. In reality, I had moved into a sprawling 6,000-square-foot penthouse in Buckhead. I spent my mornings reviewing the aggressive acquisition strategies of November equities, and my afternoons watching the meticulous legal traps I had set for my family slowly snap shut. I did not have to lift a finger to ruin them. I just had to sit back and let their own arrogance do the heavy lifting. The first domino fell on a beautiful sunny Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting at the massive marble island in my penthouse enjoying a catered lunch when my private investigator sent me a link to Charmaine's social media page. She was broadcasting a live video to her 5,000 followers. I clicked the link and watched the chaos unfold in real time. Charmaine was standing in the driveway of a massive modern mansion in Alpharetta. She was wearing another designer outfit she could not afford, holding her phone high to capture her perfect angles. Behind her, parked illegally on the street to maximize its visibility in the shot, was the pristine white Porsche Macan. "Welcome back to another exclusive luxury tour," Charmaine purred into the camera, tossing her hair over her shoulder. As a top-tier realtor, I only deal with the absolute best properties in the Atlanta metro area. When you operate with a billionaire mindset, the universe constantly rewards you with abundance. "Look at this architecture, guys." She spun around to show off the exterior of the house, but as the camera panned across the street, the aesthetic was violently interrupted. A heavy-duty industrial tow truck had just backed up directly to the front bumper of the Porsche. 2 men in neon vests jumped out. One of them immediately dropped to the asphalt, sliding a heavy steel hook under the luxury vehicle's front axle. Charmaine froze, her jaw dropping. The live stream captured her absolute panic. "Hey!" she screamed, completely dropping her professional realtor persona. "What are you doing? Get away from my car!" The tow truck driver did not even look at her. He pulled a heavy lever and the mechanical winch screamed to life. The front tires of the Porsche were violently yanked off the ground with a loud, metallic crunch. Trey suddenly sprinted out from the front door of the house they were illegally touring. He was waving his arms frantically, his face red with rage. "Yo, drop the car!" Trey yelled, charging at the repo men. "I just made a payment. You cannot take the asset." The second repo man casually pulled a clipboard from his vest and held it up. "The lien holder says otherwise, buddy. You are 3 months delinquent on the original lease, and the secondary loan you took out for the custom rims was flagged for fraudulent income verification." The bank recalled the note. "Have a nice day." Trey pulled out his phone, his hands shaking violently as he tried to open his cryptocurrency trading application to show them his supposed wealth. But as he tapped the screen, the camera captured his expression shifting from anger to pure unadulterated terror. His accounts were gone. Not just depleted but completely frozen and locked by the platform administrators due to suspicious activity. The $50,000 he stole from the church had been flagged by the federal banking system when he tried to launder it through digital tokens. He had nothing. Charmaine dropped her phone. The live stream tumbled toward the concrete, capturing a dizzying blur of the sky before landing face up on the driveway. The last thing her thousands of followers heard before the video abruptly cut off was the deafening roar of the tow truck driving away, carrying the white Porsche down the street, accompanied by Charmaine's hysterical, piercing sobs. I closed my laptop, took a slow sip of my sparkling water, and smiled. The illusion of the golden child had just been publicly shattered on the internet. But the loss of the car was merely a paper cut compared to the financial hemorrhage that was happening simultaneously across town. While Trey was staring at his frozen crypto accounts on the driveway, my father was sitting in his lavish pastoral office at the church, experiencing his own apocalyptic revelation. The bank had finally executed the legal orders from November equities. My phone, which had been blissfully silent for 3 weeks, suddenly lit up like a slot machine. The caller ID flashed my father's name. I let it ring. It stopped, then immediately started ringing again. Then came the text messages, then the voicemails. I waited a full hour, letting their panic marinate before I finally opened my visual voicemail application and pressed play on the first message. Nia, my father's voice, boomed through the speaker of my phone. He was trying to sound authoritative, but the subtle, high-pitched tremor of genuine panic betrayed him. Pick up the phone right now. We have a severe family emergency. There has been a ridiculous, massive banking error. The main accounts for the church have been temporarily locked, and the executive board is demanding a financial review by the end of the week. I need you to come to the church office immediately. Bring your forensic accounting software. We need to restructure some ledgers and fix this tiny misunderstanding before Sunday service. Family helps family, Nia. Answer your phone. A tiny misunderstanding. That is what he called embezzling $50,000 from elderly parishioners to buy a luxury vehicle. He was commanding me to come save him, completely ignoring the fact that he had thrown me out into a rainstorm and stripped me of my inheritance less than a month ago. He still believed I was the desperate, obedient scapegoat who would rush in to clean up their criminal messes. The second voicemail was from Elaine. Nia, you need to call your father back this instant, she demanded, her voice tight and frantic. Trey is dealing with a minor cash flow issue, and the dealership made a huge mistake with Charmaine's car. Everything is a mess today. We are willing to put your past disrespect behind us if you come home and help us sort out these banking glitches. Do not be vindictive, Nia. God is watching you. I deleted the voicemails. I did not text back. I did not block their numbers either because I wanted a front row seat to their psychological collapse. I wanted them to scream into the void. They were trapped in a burning building of their own making, and I had already locked all the exits from the outside. By Thursday morning, the desperate phone calls had escalated into sheer manic hysteria. Trey left a voicemail begging me for a short-term loan, promising 1,000% return. Charmaine texted me a long, rambling paragraph blaming the economy and jealous haters for her car being repossessed. My father called 8 times in a row, his voice growing increasingly hoarse and unhinged with every single message. He knew the deacon board was closing in. He knew the missing money could not be hidden without my professional expertise. But the absolute worst was yet to come for Pastor David. The frozen bank accounts were just the warm-up act. The killing blow was scheduled for delivery on Friday afternoon. The timing was executed with absolute surgical precision. At exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon, my father was hosting a massive outdoor community fish fry in the front parking lot of his megachurch. Hundreds of congregants, local politicians, and community leaders were gathered under white tents, eating and laughing. My father was standing at the podium, gripping a microphone, wearing a tailored linen suit and preaching about the financial blessings of the Lord. He was desperately trying to maintain his image of supreme power. At that exact moment, a dark green Fulton County Sheriff's cruiser slowly turned into the church parking lot. The heavy tires crunched against the gravel as the vehicle rolled right past the food tents, the flashing yellow light bar on the roof slicing through the crowd's attention. The murmurs began instantly. Hundreds of heads turned to watch as the cruiser parked directly in front of the massive glass double doors of the main sanctuary. A uniformed deputy stepped out of the vehicle. He did not look at the crowd. He did not acknowledge my father standing frozen at the podium, the microphone slipping from his trembling grip. The deputy walked briskly up the wide concrete steps, holding a staple gun and a stack of bright neon orange papers. With three loud echoing cracks of the staple gun, the deputy affixed a massive notice directly onto the wooden frame of the church doors. Notice of default and imminent foreclosure. Public auction pending. The bold black letters were large enough to be read from the parking lot. The crowd gasped collectively. The silence that fell over the fish fry was deafening. Deacons dropped their plates. Church elders stared in absolute horror. My father's knees buckled slightly, his face draining of all color as the pristine, holy image he had spent decades building shattered into a million irreparable pieces in front of his entire congregation. But the karma dominoes were not finished falling. Exactly 12 miles away at the exact same moment, a second Fulton County Sheriff's cruiser pulled into the long manicured driveway of Big Mama's historic Victorian estate. Elaine was sitting on the wrap-around porch, sipping sweet tea and entertaining three of her wealthy socialite friends from the country club. She had been bragging about her upcoming renovations to the property, completely oblivious to the legal tidal wave rushing toward her. The deputy walked up the steps, tipped his hat politely to the terrified socialites, and used a heavy strip of industrial adhesive tape to slap an identical bright orange foreclosure notice directly over the ornate brass peephole of the front door. "You have 72 hours to vacate the premises before the locks are legally changed," the deputy announced loudly, making sure Elaine's wealthy friends heard every single word. "The property is scheduled for a public county auction next Wednesday. Have a good afternoon, ladies." Elaine dropped her crystal glass. It shattered against the wooden porch, sending shards of glass and sweet tea flying across the expensive outdoor rug. She stared at the neon orange paper, her mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. Her friends awkwardly grabbed their designer purses and rushed toward their cars, whispering frantically to each other, eager to spread the scandalous news across the entire Atlanta social scene. In less than 48 hours, my family had lost their luxury car, their hidden bank accounts, their megachurch, and their prized generational estate. They had been publicly humiliated on the internet, exposed in front of their congregation, and disgraced in front of high society. The walls of their toxic fortress had been completely blown away. And the absolute best part was that they still had no idea that I was the one holding the detonator. They were about to march straight into the county courthouse to beg for their lives, completely unaware that they were walking directly into my trap. The chaotic aftermath of the dual foreclosure notices was an absolute masterclass in toxic family dynamics imploding under pressure. Within an hour of the deputies pasting the bright orange warnings onto the church doors and Big Mama's house, the entire family had convened in my father's pastoral study. The once imposing mahogany-paneled room, which had always served as the control center for my father's manipulations, was now a claustrophobic pressure cooker of panic and recriminations. The air was thick with the smell of my mother's expensive perfume and the sharp tang of genuine fear. I was not in the room, of course, but the private investigator I had hired to monitor their movements provided me with a detailed, minute-by-minute account of their frantic activities. And thanks to a strategically placed listening device that my investigator had managed to plant near the study window during the community fish fry, I got to listen to every single word of their spectacular meltdown from the comfort of my penthouse. My father was pacing the length of the Persian rug, his face a mottled, unhealthy shade of purple. The microphone he had dropped at the fish fry was still ringing in his ears, along with the collective gasp of his congregation. Elaine was slumped in a leather wingback chair, clutching a damp handkerchief, her usual poised demeanor completely shattered. Charmaine and Trey stood on opposite sides of the massive desk, glaring at each other with an intensity that bordered on physical violence. The illusion of their perfect, wealthy marriage had vanished the moment the Porsche was dragged down the street. How could this happen? Elaine shrieked, her voice cracking hysterically. She dabbed aggressively at her smudged mascara. Do you have any idea what my friends from the country club are saying right now? They saw the sheriff staple that hideous orange paper right to our front door. The gossip columns are going to have a field day. We are ruined, David. We are absolutely ruined. Keep your voice down, Elaine, my father snapped, running a trembling hand over his face. Crying about your country club friends is not going to fix the fact that the bank is going to auction off the church on Wednesday. The church, Elaine. Do you understand what that means? If the deacon board finds out that the building is in foreclosure because I leveraged it to the hilt to fund your lifestyle and Trey's supposed investments, I will not just be defrocked. I will be facing federal indictment. Trey shifted uncomfortably, adjusting the collar of his shirt. Now hold on, Pops. Let us not start throwing around words like indictment. This is just a temporary cash flow hiccup. The bank must have made an administrative error. I am telling you, my crypto portfolio is solid. The platform just froze the assets temporarily because of a security protocol. Once I get a hold of the customer service reps, we can liquidate the tokens and pay off the arrears on both mortgages. Charmaine let out a sound that was half laugh and half scream. A temporary cash flow hiccup. Are you completely delusional, Trey? They repossessed my Porsche in the middle of a live stream. My followers saw the whole thing. I am a laughingstock. You told me we were rich. You told me the church fund was a bottomless pit that we could borrow from whenever we wanted. My father stopped pacing, dead in his tracks. He turned slowly to look at Charmaine, his eyes widening in horror. He had always known that Trey was siphoning money from the church, but he had chosen to turn a blind eye as long as Trey promised astronomical returns. He had convinced himself it was a sophisticated financial strategy. Hearing his golden child refer to his sacred church charity as a bottomless pit for her personal shopping sprees finally shattered his delusion. What did you just say? My father whispered, his voice trembling with a rage so profound it actually commanded silence. Charmaine shrank back slightly, suddenly realizing she had spoken the quiet part out loud. I just meant, she stammered, looking at Trey for help. Trey said the building fund had hundreds of thousands of dollars in it. He said you authorized the $50,000 for the car to keep up appearances. Trey held up his hands defensively, backing away from the desk. Wait. Pops, do not put this all on me. You signed the wire transfers. You knew exactly where that money was going. You knew Charmaine needed the car for her real estate image. You lied to me. My father roared, the sheer volume of his voice making the heavy wooden doors rattle in their frames. You told me the crypto investment was guaranteed. You told me you would double the money and put the $50,000 back before the audit. I tried to, Pops. Trey pleaded, his arrogant facade finally crumbling into pathetic desperation. But the market tanked. The coin I invested in was a rug pull. The developers took the liquidity and vanished. The money is gone. All of it. The $50,000 from the church, the cash advances from Elaine's credit cards, everything. The accounts are frozen because there is nothing left to withdraw. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. The reality of their situation finally settled over them like a suffocating blanket. They had absolutely no money. They had massive defaulted debts. And the $50,000 they had stolen from the church was permanently lost in the digital ether. My father closed his eyes, his breathing ragged and shallow. He walked slowly around the massive oak desk, stopping directly in front of Trey. Trey tried to offer a weak, conciliatory smile, opening his mouth to utter another empty promise about the billionaire mindset. Before Trey could form a single syllable, my father raised his hand and struck him across the face with a loud, sickening crack. The slap was so forceful it spun Trey completely around, sending him crashing into the heavy bookshelves lining the wall. Elaine screamed, jumping out of her chair. Charmaine covered her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. My father stood over his son-in-law, his chest heaving, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles were completely white. You arrogant, parasitic fool! My father spat, his voice dropping into a terrifying guttural snarl. You destroyed my legacy. You stole from my church. You used my daughter to fund your pathetic fantasies. If I lose that building on Wednesday, I am going to make sure the federal prosecutors know exactly whose idea it was to wire those funds. Trey scrambled to his feet, holding his rapidly swelling jaw, his eyes darting frantically around the room. "You cannot do that," he stammered. "If I go down, you go down with me. You are the sole signatory on those accounts. You authorized every single transfer." The standoff was broken by the sharp, piercing ring of the telephone on my father's desk. Everyone froze. My father took a deep, shuddering breath, smoothed down his tie, and picked up the receiver. "Hello," he said, his voice forcibly leveled into his usual pastoral tone. "Yes, this is David." He listened for a moment, his face growing paler with every passing second. "No, that is impossible. We were told we had until the end of the month to restructure." He paused again, gripping the edge of the desk. "Who bought the debt? Tell me the name of the holding company. November Equities. Who are they?" He slammed his hand against the wood. "Well, you have to give us a chance to match the offer. We will have the money by Wednesday. I guarantee it." He slammed the phone down, the plastic cracking under the force. He looked at Elaine, his eyes wild with sheer panic. "The bank sold the debt," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "They sold the promissory notes for the church and the house to a private equity firm called November Equities. The bank has completely washed their hands of us. The equity firm triggered the immediate foreclosure clause. Both properties are going up for public auction at the county courthouse on Wednesday morning. We have exactly 4 days to save everything." 4 days! Elaine gasped, clutching her chest. "David, we do not have $400, let alone the hundreds of thousands we need to stop an auction. What are we going to do?" My father began pacing again, the gears in his mind turning frantically. "We have to buy the properties back at the auction. It is the only way to retain the deeds and keep the deacon board from digging into the original mortgages. If we own the properties outright, the paper trail of the defaulted loans disappears." "But with what money?" Charmaine cried, tears streaming down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. "I know a guy," Trey suddenly spoke up, his voice muffled, as he held a handkerchief to his jaw. "He is a private lender, a hard money guy. He does not care about credit scores or bank audits. He only cares about collateral and massive interest rates. If we pledge the future tithes of the church and whatever equity is left in Elaine's jewelry collection, he might front us enough cash to win the auction." My father stopped pacing. He looked at Trey, the disgust still evident in his eyes, but the desperate need for survival overriding his anger. "A hard money lender. You mean a loan shark?" "He is an aggressive investor," Trey corrected weakly. "But he has liquid capital, millions of it. If we go to him today, we can have a certified cashier's check by Wednesday morning. We walk into that courthouse, we outbid everyone else, and we buy back the church and the house. We save the family name." It was a catastrophic, incredibly dangerous plan. They were proposing taking out a massive predatory loan with exorbitant interest rates just to buy back properties they had already lost. They were digging their financial grave 10 feet deeper just to cover up the dirt on the surface. But they were trapped by their own vanity and their desperate need to maintain their image. They could not fathom the idea of walking away and admitting defeat. "Make the call!" My father ordered, his voice cold and resolute. "Tell him we need $2 million in liquid cash by Tuesday night. Offer him whatever collateral he wants. We are not losing this empire." I listened to the recording in my penthouse, shaking my head in absolute disbelief. They were so predictable. They were so blinded by their own arrogance that they actually believed they could outmaneuver the system. They were going to walk into that courthouse on Wednesday morning with a predatory loan, fully expecting to easily buy back their properties and continue their lives of luxury and lies. They had no idea that November Equities was not just a faceless corporation. They had no idea that they were walking straight into a high-stakes financial slaughterhouse, and I was the one holding the gavel. Wednesday morning broke with a suffocating humidity that hung over downtown Atlanta like a wet wool blanket. Pastor David, Elaine, Charmaine, and Trey walked up the wide concrete steps of the Fulton County Courthouse. They moved as a single miserable unit, their usual arrogant strides replaced by the frantic, rapid shuffling of cornered animals. My father was sweating profusely. Dark half-moons of perspiration stained the underarms of his tailored charcoal suit, and his breathing was shallow and erratic. Elaine walked beside him, clutching her designer handbag so tightly her knuckles were completely white. She was wearing oversized dark sunglasses to hide her bloodshot eyes, terrified that one of her socialite friends might drive by and witness her public walk of shame. Charmaine and Trey trailed slightly behind them, refusing to look at each other. The bruising on Trey's jaw from my father's slap was turning an ugly, vivid shade of yellow and purple, a physical manifestation of the rot destroying their family from the inside out. Inside the massive courthouse, the air conditioning offered absolutely no relief to their mounting panic. They passed through the security metal detectors and made their way to the crowded auction room on the third floor. The room was cold and sterile, filled with rows of hard wooden benches and the echoing murmur of real estate investors, hedge fund representatives, and distressed homeowners. My father patted the breast pocket of his suit jacket for the 100th time. Tucked safely inside was a certified cashier's check for $2.5 million. Trey had actually managed to secure the money from his predatory loan shark contact late Tuesday night, but the terms were absolute financial suicide. They had pledged the future equity of the church, the deed to the house, and a horrifying 30% monthly interest rate. It was a deal made in pure, unadulterated desperation. My father believed that as long as he could walk out of this building with the deeds back in his name, he could restructure the massive debt, later beg his congregation for a special miracle offering, and somehow keep the illusion of his untouchable empire intact. He thought the $2.5 million check was an impenetrable shield. The auctioneer, a bored-looking county official with a dry, monotone voice, stepped up to the wooden podium at exactly 9 o'clock in the morning. He tapped the microphone, the sharp electronic feedback instantly silencing the crowded room. My family took their seats in the second row. Elaine reached out and grabbed my father's trembling hand. Charmaine bit her perfectly manicured thumbnail, her eyes darting nervously around the room, while Trey stared blankly at the floor. We will now begin the bidding for the residential property located on Magnolia Drive. The auctioneer announced, reading off the specific parcel number for Big Mama's historic Victorian estate. The starting bid is set at $600,000, covering the outstanding defaulted principal and all associated county legal fees. My father did not hesitate for a single second. He immediately raised his numbered yellow paddle high into the air. 650,000, he barked, his voice echoing loudly in the sterile room. He looked around the room, puffing his chest out, slightly desperately attempting to project the dominant, wealthy pastor persona he had relied on his entire life. A few aggressive real estate flippers in the back row raised their paddles, quickly pushing the price to $700,000, then $750,000. But they were looking for a bargain. They were not emotionally invested in the property. My father raised his paddle again, his hand shaking slightly. $800,000, he declared firmly. The room went completely quiet. The flippers lowered their paddles, whispering to each other and shaking their heads. The profit margin was officially gone for them. My father let out a long, ragged exhale, a triumphant, arrogant smile finally breaking through the heavy sweat on his face. He leaned over and whispered to Elaine, "We have it. The house is ours again. We just have to secure the church next, and this entire nightmare is completely over." Going once at 800,000, the auctioneer droned slowly, raising his heavy wooden gavel into the air, going twice at 800,000. Before the gavel could strike the sounding block, the heavy double doors at the back of the auction room swung open with a loud, dramatic creak. Every single head in the room turned to look. A tall, impeccably dressed corporate attorney stepped over the threshold. He was wearing a navy blue designer suit and carrying a slim black leather briefcase. He radiated the kind of quiet, absolute authority that only comes from possessing unlimited, untouchable resources. He walked calmly down the center aisle, his expensive leather shoes clicking rhythmically against the linoleum floor, completely ignoring the stares of the crowd. He stopped right behind the first row, directly in the line of sight of the auctioneer. "Excuse me," the attorney said, his voice crisp, clear, and perfectly modulated. "On behalf of November Equities, LC, I bid $2 million in pure unfinanced cash. The entire auction room erupted into shocked, deafening murmurs. The seasoned real estate investors in the back rows gasped audibly. A $2 million cash bid on a property valued at barely $1 million was completely unheard of in a standard county foreclosure auction. It was an aggressive, hostile financial strike meant to instantly obliterate all competition. My father shot up from his wooden bench, his face completely draining of color. $2 million, he shouted, pointing a trembling finger at the attorney. That is absolutely absurd. The property is not even appraised for half of that amount. This is a massive mistake. The attorney slowly turned his head to look directly at my father. His expression was completely blank, entirely devoid of any pity or human emotion. There is no mistake, sir, the attorney replied smoothly. My client has instructed me to acquire this specific property at any cost. We are prepared to outbid any counteroffer you present by a margin of $1 million. My father stood completely frozen, his mouth opening and closing in absolute disbelief. He reached into his suit pocket, feeling the stiff paper of the certified check for $2.5 million. He had explicitly intended to use $1 million for the house and $1.5 million for the church. If he engaged in a bidding war against a billionaire holding company willing to drop $2 million instantly, he would wipe out the loan shark's money on a single property and lose the church entirely. He was completely, hopelessly trapped. Elaine frantically yanked on the sleeve of his suit jacket, her voice a terrified hissing whisper. David, sit down right now. Let the house go. We have to save the church. The church is the only way we generate income to survive. If we lose the sanctuary, we lose everything. We cannot fight a billionaire holding company for a house. Sit down before you ruin us. My father's broad shoulders slumped. The fight completely drained out of his body. He slowly sank back onto the hard wooden bench, burying his face in his trembling hands. The auctioneer cleared his throat, staring in absolute awe at the sharp-suited attorney. Sold to November Equities, LLC for $2 million cash, the auctioneer announced loudly, bringing the gavel down with a loud, final crack. Charmaine let out a quiet, strangled sob. Big Mama's house, the prized jewel of their generational wealth, the very same house they had threatened to take away from me just to force my financial compliance, was officially gone forever. It now belonged to a faceless corporate entity, and they had absolutely no power to stop it. But the absolute worst was yet to come. The auctioneer flipped to the very next page in his heavy binder. We will now move to the commercial property, listing the auctioneer announced, his voice regaining its professional cadence. The church sanctuary and accompanying administrative buildings located on South Main Street. Starting bid is $1.2 million. My father sat up straight, gripping his yellow paddle so tightly the cheap plastic actually began to bend under the pressure. He had lost his mother's house, but he was absolutely not going to lose his pulpit. His entire identity was tied to that building. He raised his paddle high. $1.5 million, he yelled desperately, sweat pouring down his face. The auctioneer nodded. $1.5 million is the current bid. Do we have any other offers on the floor? The attorney for November Equities did not even blink. He calmly raised his hand. $4.5 million. He stated, his voice echoing through the silent room like a heavy death sentence. Unfinanced liquid cash. Immediate electronic transfer. The auction room fell into a dead, horrifying silence. $4.5 million was triple the actual market value of the crumbling megachurch. It was an astronomical, insurmountable sum of money. It was not a real estate investment. It was a targeted, calculated execution. My father let out a sound that I can only describe as a dying animal. It was a guttural, wheezing gasp that tore from the very bottom of his chest. He leaped to his feet, lunging toward the center aisle. "You cannot do this!" he screamed, spit flying from his lips, his eyes rolling wildly with sheer panic. "Who is your client? Who is November Equities? Tell me who is doing this to my family. This is my church. I built that congregation from the ground up. You cannot just walk in here and buy my entire life with pocket change." Two armed county bailiffs immediately stepped forward, placing their hands heavily on their utility belts, loudly warning my father to step back. Elaine was weeping openly now, her face buried in her hands, no longer caring who saw her perfectly crafted image disintegrate in a public courtroom. Trey was staring blankly at the wall, realizing that he was not just completely broke. He was currently indebted to a violent loan shark for $2.5 million that he no longer had any use for, because the collateral to pay it back was completely gone. The attorney calmly adjusted his expensive silk tie. He looked directly at my father, his face a perfect mask of corporate indifference. "My client prefers to remain entirely anonymous," the attorney said. "However, my client did ask me to relay a single message to you, Pastor David, upon the successful acquisition of these properties." My father stopped struggling against the approaching bailiffs. He stood there panting heavily, sweat dripping from his forehead onto his ruined silk tie. "What message?" he whispered, his voice cracking with absolute paralyzing terror. The attorney opened his black leather briefcase. He reached inside and pulled out a small, crinkled, slightly stained paper envelope. It was the exact same envelope my mother had handed to me in the driveway on Thanksgiving Day. The attorney walked slowly across the aisle and held it out to my father. "My client wanted to remind you that true generational wealth is built on family sacrifice," the attorney said perfectly, quoting the exact manipulative words my father had used against me at the Thanksgiving dinner table. My father stared at the cheap paper envelope. His trembling hands reached out and took it. He slowly opened the flap. Inside was a high-quality photocopy of a brightly colored $10 scratch-off lottery ticket. Across the bottom of the ticket, the winning numbers matched perfectly clearly, displaying the $310 million jackpot. And in the bottom right corner, printed boldly in black ink, was the date the ticket had been legally claimed, the week of Thanksgiving. The realization hit my father like a runaway freight train. His eyes widened to the size of saucers. His mouth fell open in a silent scream of absolute mind-shattering horror. Elaine looked over his shoulder, saw the photocopied lottery ticket, and immediately collapsed onto the wooden bench, her body convulsing with hyperventilation. Charmaine and Trey stared at the paper, their brains completely short-circuiting as the impossible truth finally locked into place. "Sold to November Equities, LLC, for $4.5 million cash," the auctioneer shouted, slamming the gavel down one final time. In less than 5 minutes, my family's entire empire had been legally wiped from the face of the earth. Their wealth, their status, and their legacy were completely gone. And they finally realized that the architect of their total destruction was the exact same daughter they had thrown out into the mud. The attorney turned on his perfectly polished heel and began walking calmly down the center aisle of the courthouse, his black leather briefcase swinging lightly at his side. He had delivered his devastating message and was ready to leave them to rot in their own realization. But my father, shaking with a violent cocktail of rage and sheer paralyzing terror, was not ready to let him walk away. The implications of that photocopied lottery ticket were too massive, too utterly catastrophic for his mind to fully absorb. If I was the one pulling the strings, if I was the one who had just spent $6.5 million in liquid cash to buy his church and his mother's house, it meant he was entirely at my mercy. And he knew exactly how much mercy he had shown me when I was standing on his porch in the freezing rain. "Wait!" my father shouted, his voice cracking horribly as he scrambled over the heavy wooden bench. He sprinted down the aisle, completely ignoring the warning shouts of the armed county bailiffs. He grabbed the attorney by the shoulder of his expensive suit. "You wait right there. You cannot just drop a piece of paper in my hand and walk away. I need to speak to whoever is running this operation. I need a meeting with the head of November Equities immediately." The attorney slowly turned his head, looking down at my father's trembling hand resting on his shoulder. He did not say a word, but the cold, dead expression in his eyes made my father quickly pull his hand back, as if he had just touched a hot stove. "My client anticipated that you would request an audience," the attorney said smoothly, reaching into the inner pocket of his jacket. He pulled out a thick, embossed black card and held it out. My father snatched it from his fingers. "The CEO of November Equities will see you today at exactly 12 noon. Do not be late. We do not tolerate tardiness." Without another word, the attorney walked out of the double doors, leaving my family standing in the middle of the crowded auction room, surrounded by whispering real estate investors who were actively relishing their public downfall. The journey from the Fulton County Courthouse to the Midtown Atlanta Financial District was a masterclass in suffocating tension. Because Trey no longer had his leased luxury SUV, and Charmaine's Porsche had been violently repossessed, they were forced to squeeze into the back of a cheap, heavily dented rideshare sedan that Elaine had to order on her rapidly declining credit card. The oppressive midday heat of the city seemed to press in on them through the smudged windows of the car. My investigators' audio surveillance captured every pathetic, delusional word spoken during that 20-minute drive. "She cannot possibly be running a private equity firm," Elaine muttered frantically, her manicured nails digging into the cheap fabric of the car seat. "Nia is just an accountant, a glorified calculator. She probably took that lottery money and handed it over to a bunch of greedy Wall Street suits to manage for her. She is just a client paying them to harass us out of spite." Trey wiped a thick bead of sweat from his forehead, his bruised jaw throbbing with every bump in the road. "It does not matter if she is running it or not. Elaine," he snapped, his voice trembling with genuine fear. "The firm legally owns the deeds now. The hard money lender I borrowed the $2.5 million from is expecting collateral by the end of the business week. If I tell him the church and the house are gone, he is not going to send a lawyer. He is going to send men with baseball bats. We need a grace period. We need to beg whoever is actually sitting in that CEO chair for a lease agreement." My father stared blankly out the window, his chest rising and falling in shallow, panicked breaths. "Trey is right," he whispered hoarsely. "If we can just secure a lease agreement for the church building, we can keep the doors open. We can keep the congregation coming in. I can still manipulate the ledgers enough to hide the missing $50,000 from the deacon board before the annual audit. If we lose the physical building, the board will freeze everything, the FBI will get involved, and I will go to federal prison. We have to negotiate. We will offer them 40% of our monthly tithes. We will offer them whatever they want." Charmaine just wept quietly in the corner, mourning the death of her imaginary luxury brand. They were entirely focused on survival, completely blinded by their own deeply ingrained arrogance. They still believed that because they were dealing with a corporate entity, they could charm, negotiate, or bribe their way out of the consequences. They simply could not compute the reality that the ultimate power now rested entirely in the hands of the daughter they had discarded. The rideshare sedan pulled up to the curb of a towering glass and steel skyscraper in the absolute most expensive sector of Midtown. It was a monolith of modern architecture, radiating wealth and untouchable power. The family stepped out onto the pristine sidewalk, feeling incredibly small and utterly out of place. My father straightened his ruined, sweat-stained tie. Elaine attempted to smooth her wrinkled designer dress, putting her oversized sunglasses back on to hide her swollen red eyes. They walked through the massive revolving glass doors into a lobby covered in imported Italian marble and contemporary art. They approached the main security desk. My father presented the embossed black card to a formidable-looking security director in a tailored black suit. The director barely glanced at it before nodding curtly. "The executive suite is on the top floor," the security director said, gesturing toward a private glass-walled elevator guarded by a velvet rope. "You are expected." They stepped into the private elevator. The doors slid shut seamlessly, and the cab shot upward with a silent stomach-dropping speed. The numbers on the digital display climbed rapidly, leaving the noise and chaos of the city far below them. The higher they went, the heavier the silence in the elevator became. When the doors finally opened on the penthouse floor, the sheer, overwhelming display of quiet luxury physically took their breath away. The entire floor belonged to November Equities. The walls were constructed of flawless floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a stunning, unobstructed panoramic view of the entire Atlanta skyline. The floors were polished dark hardwood covered in plush hand-woven rugs. Abstract art worth millions of dollars hung on the walls. A receptionist sitting behind a massive, floating marble desk stood up immediately upon their arrival. "Pastor David and family," the receptionist said with a polite, razor-sharp smile. "Follow me, please." They were led down a wide, sunlit corridor toward a set of massive frosted glass double doors at the very end of the hall. The receptionist pushed the doors open, gesturing for them to enter. The executive boardroom was breathtaking. It was a massive open space designed specifically to intimidate. A long, polished mahogany conference table stretched across the center of the room. But the focal point of the office was the massive executive desk, situated directly in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows. Behind the desk, a high-backed, ribbed leather chair was turned completely away from the door, facing out toward the sprawling sunlit city. My father stepped into the room cautiously, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Elaine, Charmaine, and Trey filed in behind him, standing close together like a herd of frightened sheep. The receptionist pulled the heavy glass doors shut behind them, leaving them entirely alone with the silent figure sitting in the chair. My father cleared his throat desperately, trying to summon the booming, authoritative, pastoral voice that had commanded thousands of people for decades. But when he spoke, his voice came out thin, weak, and remarkably small. "Hello," my father said, clasping his trembling hands in front of him. "I am Pastor David. I assume you are the chief executive officer of this firm. I am here to discuss the commercial and residential properties your company acquired at the county auction this morning. We are prepared to offer you an incredibly lucrative, long-term commercial lease agreement that will guarantee a massive return on your investment." The leather chair did not move. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the faint ambient hum of the central air conditioning. "Please," Trey interjected, stepping forward slightly, his desperation completely overriding his fear. "We just need to keep the church doors open. We will sign whatever lease documents you want right now. We will give you a 50% cut of all incoming revenue. Just turn around and look at the numbers." Slowly, deliberately, the high-backed leather chair began to swivel around. The breath instantly vanished from my father's lungs. Charmaine let out a sharp, audible gasp, taking 2 stumbling steps backward until her back hit the solid wood of the conference table. Trey's jaw dropped open so wide it looked like it might unhinge entirely. I sat comfortably behind the massive mahogany desk, resting my elbows lightly on the polished wood. I was wearing a $5,000 bespoke navy blue suit, tailored to absolute perfection. A crisp white silk blouse rested against my collarbone, and a solid gold Cartier watch gleamed brightly on my wrist under the recessed lighting. My hair was styled immaculately. I radiated the kind of serene, untouchable power that only comes from having total, unyielding control over your own destiny. I looked at the 4 of them, my expression completely neutral, enjoying the exact moment their brains collectively broke. Elaine stared at me, her eyes darting frantically around the luxurious office, her mind desperately trying to reject the reality sitting right in front of her. Her narcissistic delusion was so deep, so permanently ingrained in her psyche, that she instantly defaulted to the only dynamic she understood. "Nia," Elaine stammered, her voice high-pitched and incredibly confused. "What on earth are you doing sitting behind that desk? Whose office are you cleaning? You need to get up right now before the CEO comes in and has us all arrested for trespassing." I did not laugh. I did not raise my voice. I simply leaned forward, reached into the top drawer of the mahogany desk, and pulled out 2 thick, heavy legal folders bound in blue covers. I dropped them onto the center of the desk with a loud, authoritative thud. I slowly opened the first folder, revealing the original stamped deed to Big Mama's historic Victorian estate. Then I opened the second folder, revealing the commercial deed to my father's sprawling megachurch. Both documents clearly listed November Equities, LLC, as the sole undisputed legal owner. "I am not cleaning the office, Mom," I said, my voice smooth, cold, and echoing with absolute finality. "I own the office. I own the holding company. I own the debt. I own the church. I own it all." For a solid 30 seconds, the executive boardroom was so quiet you could hear the faint hum of the city traffic hundreds of feet below. The words hung in the air, thick and immovable. I own it all. The physical reaction to those 4 words was spectacular to witness. Elaine literally swayed on her feet, grabbing the edge of the mahogany table to keep from collapsing onto the polished hardwood. Charmaine let out a sound that was less of a gasp and more of a squeak, her perfectly contoured face contorting into an ugly mask of sheer disbelief. Trey just stood there, his mouth opening and closing silently, looking like a fish that had just been unceremoniously tossed onto dry land. But my father's reaction was the most fascinating. The initial shock, the absolute paralyzing terror of losing his empire, lasted for only a brief moment, before his deeply ingrained narcissistic survival instincts completely took over. His brain rapidly processed the new reality and instantly twisted it to fit his own narrative. In his mind, I wasn't the architect of his destruction. I was the miraculous, obedient savior he had always demanded I be. A massive, brilliant smile suddenly broke across my father's face. The color rushed back to his cheeks. He threw his arms wide open, taking a bold step toward my desk, completely abandoning the terrified, defeated posture he had carried into the room. "Praise God," my father boomed his voice, regaining that rich, authoritative resonance he used during Sunday service. "Praise the Lord for his mysterious and wondrous ways." He looked back at Elaine and Charmaine, tears of manufactured joy welling in his eyes. "Do you see what the Lord has done? He used our own flesh and blood. He used Nia to save this family." He turned back to me, leaning heavily on the mahogany desk, his smile practically blinding. "Nia, my beautiful, brilliant daughter. I always knew your meticulous nature would serve a higher purpose. You secured the properties. You bought out the debt. It is a true Thanksgiving miracle. All you have to do now is have your legal team draft the transfer documents, deed the church and the house back into my name, and we can completely put this entire stressful misunderstanding behind us. We can go back to being a family." Elaine, catching on to my father's delusion, instantly brightened. She stood up straight, smoothing her designer dress, her face transforming into a mask of maternal pride that I had not seen in 35 years. "Oh, Nia, I am so incredibly proud of you," she gushed, taking a step toward me. "I knew you had it in you. We will host a massive dinner party at Big Mama's house next weekend to celebrate your success. You can even park your little car in the driveway this time. Just sign the papers, sweetheart. We have a lot of planning to do." Trey nodded eagerly, rubbing his bruised jaw. "Yeah, Nia, this is incredible. You really clutched up for the team. Once the properties are back in Pop's name, the hard money lender will back off, and we can all get back to building generational wealth." I sat perfectly still, listening to them seamlessly pivot from throwing me out into the rain to demanding I hand over a multi-million-dollar real estate portfolio, all wrapped in the toxic guise of family unity. They hadn't learned a single thing. They felt no remorse. They just saw a massive pile of money and immediately assumed it belonged to them. I did not yell. I did not scream. I did not even raise my voice. The time for emotional outbursts was long gone. I simply reached back into the top drawer of my desk and pulled out a thick, perfectly bound 300-page legal dossier. It was heavy, meticulously tabbed, and printed on pristine white paper. I slid it slowly across the polished mahogany surface until it stopped directly in front of my father's hands. "I didn't save you," I said, my voice dropping to a low, icy register that completely shattered the warm delusion in the room. "I audited you." My father's smile faltered slightly. He looked down at the thick binder, his brow furrowing in confusion. "What is this?" he asked, his voice losing a fraction of its booming confidence. "That," I replied calmly, leaning back in my leather chair, "is a comprehensive forensic accounting report. It details every single financial transaction, every hidden ledger, and every fraudulent wire transfer executed by you and your son-in-law over the past 36 months. Trey physically recoiled, stumbling backward into Charmaine, who let out a sharp cry of protest. "What are you talking about?" Trey stammered, his eyes darting frantically toward the heavy glass doors. "Let's start with Thanksgiving." I continued, interlocking my fingers and resting them on the desk. "You both stood on the patio and loudly discussed the $50,000 you embezzled from the church building fund to buy Charmaine's Porsche. You discussed your plan to force me into taking out a second mortgage to cover the theft before the Deacon Board's annual audit. And most importantly, you discussed your contingency plan to frame me for felony wire fraud if the audit happened early simply because I was a forensic accountant and you needed a convenient fall guy. The color instantly drained from my father's face, leaving him a sickly ashen gray. He stared at me, his mouth completely dry, unable to form a single word. He finally realized that the open kitchen window had been the catalyst for his entire downfall. But I didn't just stop at the 50,000, I said, my gaze sweeping across their terrified faces. I went back 3 years. I tracked the secondary mortgages you illegally took out against Big Mama's house to fund Mom's country club memberships. I tracked the massive predatory commercial loans you secured against the church property by forging the signatures of the deacon board. I tracked the hundreds of thousands of dollars Trey siphoned into fraudulent cryptocurrency accounts, using the church's tax-exempt status as a shield. It is all documented. Bank statements, IP addresses, forged digital signatures. Everything. Elaine let out a low, whimpering moan, sinking slowly into one of the leather conference chairs. Charmaine was hyperventilating, clutching her designer bag against her chest like a shield. "You cannot show that to anyone," my father whispered hoarsely, his hands trembling violently as he hovered over the dossier. "Nia, if the deacon board sees this, they will strip me of my title. They will ruin my reputation." "The deacon board is the least of your concerns," I replied smoothly. I reached over and pressed a small silver button on the intercom console sitting on my desk. "Send them in," I instructed calmly. The heavy frosted glass doors of the executive boardroom swung open. 2 tall men wearing sharp dark suits walked into the room. Their expressions were grim and entirely professional. They both reached into their breast pockets simultaneously and pulled out leather badges, flipping them open to reveal the gleaming gold shields of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Special Agent Miller and Special Agent Davis. The taller of the 2 men announced, his voice cutting through the thick tension in the room like a surgical blade. "We are with the White-Collar Crime Division." Trey let out a high-pitched, terrified squeal. He turned and actually tried to run toward the glass windows, as if he could somehow escape a penthouse 50 stories above the ground. The second FBI agent moved with terrifying speed, grabbing Trey by the shoulder and spinning him around, slamming him face first onto the polished mahogany conference table. The sharp, metallic click of handcuffs echoing in the pristine office was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. "David Vance," Agent Miller said, stepping directly up to my father, who was standing frozen, his eyes wide with absolute unadulterated horror. "We have a federal warrant for your arrest on multiple counts of wire fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering." My father looked at the FBI agent, then looked down at the forensic accounting dossier, and finally looked up at me. His authoritative facade completely shattered. He was no longer the powerful, untouchable pastor. He was just a pathetic, greedy old man who had finally run out of lies. "Nia," he choked out, tears streaming down his face. "Please, you are my daughter. You cannot let them do this to me. Tell them it's a mistake. Tell them you will fix the ledgers." Agent Miller grabbed my father's arms forcefully, pulling them behind his back. "David Vance, you have the right to remain silent." The agent began reciting the Miranda warning with practiced efficiency. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." I sat comfortably in my leather chair, watching the agent secure the handcuffs around my father's wrists. He didn't fight back. He just wept openly, his body trembling with the realization that his entire life was over. Elaine was screaming hysterically now, grabbing the agent's sleeve, begging him to stop babbling incoherently about her social status and her country club friends. Charmaine had collapsed onto the floor, curling into a fetal position, sobbing uncontrollably as she watched her husband and her father being marched toward the glass doors in chains. I didn't feel an ounce of pity. I didn't feel a shred of guilt. I just felt a profound, overwhelming sense of justice. They had tried to destroy my life to protect their image. They had tried to steal my future to fund their greed. Now they were going to spend the rest of their lives paying for it. And I was going to sit in my multi-million-dollar penthouse and watch every single second of it. The heavy frosted glass doors swung shut, cutting off my father's pathetic, echoing sobs as the federal agents marched him and Trey down the sunlit corridor toward the private elevators. The distinct, sharp chime of the elevator arriving sounded like a final death knell for their toxic empire. The metal doors slid open, swallowed them up, and slid closed with a heavy mechanical thud. Just like that, the two men who had terrorized, manipulated, and stolen from everyone around them were completely gone, reduced to federal inmates facing decades in federal prison. The silence that rushed back into the executive boardroom was heavy, absolute, and utterly suffocating. I remained seated comfortably behind my massive mahogany desk, resting my hands in my lap, breathing in the quiet, expensive air of my domain. I looked across the room at the two women left behind. Elaine and Charmaine were completely frozen in place, staring blankly at the closed glass doors, as if they expected my father to suddenly burst back through them, waving a Bible and commanding the universe to bend to his righteous will. But the universe was no longer listening to Pastor David. The illusion of his holy authority had been shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Elaine was the first to physically break the silence. The reality of her grim situation was finally crashing down through the thick, stubborn layers of her narcissistic delusion. She had no powerful husband to provide her social status. She had no sprawling megachurch to parade around in as the beloved, untouchable First Lady. She had no historic Victorian estate to host her wealthy country club friends. She was entirely cut off, entirely exposed, and entirely at the mercy of the eldest daughter she had callously thrown into the freezing rain just a few weeks prior. She turned slowly to face me. Her perfectly coiffed hair was beginning to unravel at the edges. Her expensive designer dress suddenly looked ridiculous, like a cheap, ill-fitting costume on an actor who had completely forgotten her lines. Nia Elaine whispered, her voice trembling so violently she could barely form the syllables. "What have you done? You sent your own father to jail. You destroyed your family." "I did not destroy anything, Mom," I replied, my voice calm, cold, and perfectly steady. "I simply held up a mirror. Your husband and your son-in-law destroyed this family the exact moment they decided to steal from a charity fund and use my name as their insurance policy. I just handed the mirror over to the federal government so they could see the true reflection." "You could have stopped this," Elaine cried, taking a hesitant step forward. Her hands hovered in the air as if she wanted to grab me, but was terrified of crossing the physical distance between us. "You have hundreds of millions of dollars. You could have paid off the church debt quietly. You could have bought back Big Mama's house and just kept it safely in the family. We could have fixed Trey's minor mistakes without getting the authorities involved. You are wicked, Nia. You are a wicked, vindictive, hateful girl." I leaned forward, placing my forearms firmly on the polished desk. "Let us be entirely clear about who is wicked, Elaine. You knew. You knew exactly where the money was coming from. You knew my father was taking out predatory loans against Big Mama's house to pay for your country club dues and your luxury vacations to the Bahamas. You knew Trey had zero steady income, yet you happily watched him buy your golden child an $80,000 car in cash. You were perfectly willing to let them frame me for federal wire fraud just so you would not have to give up your weekly manicures and your pathetic illusion of high society. You are not a victim here. You are an active accomplice who simply ran out of money." Elaine flinched violently, as if I had physically struck her across the face. She opened her mouth to argue, to launch into another manipulative, guilt-tripping tirade about honoring my parents and Christian forgiveness, but the words completely died in her throat. She looked into my cold, unwavering eyes and finally realized that the old Nia, the desperate daughter who craved her validation and feared her rejection, was completely, permanently dead. There was absolutely no one left for her to manipulate. With a pathetic, whimpering sob, Elaine turned away from the desk. She walked slowly over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, pressing her trembling hands against the cool glass, looking down at the sprawling, bustling city of Atlanta. She had absolutely nowhere to go. That was when Charmaine finally snapped. The golden child had spent her entire life floating on a soft cushion of unearned privilege, funded entirely by my financial sacrifices and my parents' stolen money. She had never faced a single consequence. She had never been told no. Now, in the span of a single hour, her luxury SUV was gone. Her fake real estate career was brutally exposed. Her husband was headed to a federal penitentiary, and she was entirely homeless. Charmaine stumbled forward blindly, her knees buckling completely under the weight of her new reality. She collapsed onto the polished hardwood floor right in front of my desk. Her expensive designer handbag spilled open, scattering premium cosmetics and platinum credit cards that were now completely useless, deactivated pieces of plastic. She slammed her hands against the floor, weeping with a loud guttural intensity that echoed sharply off the glass walls of the penthouse. "Nia, please." Charmaine wailed, her face red and painfully contorted with sheer panic. She dragged herself across the floor on her knees, reaching out to desperately grab the edge of the mahogany desk. "Please, you have to help me. We are sisters. We are blood." I looked down at her. Sisters. It was a word she only ever used when she needed a financial bailout or a scapegoat. "I have nothing." "Nia," Charmaine sobbed, the tears ruining her professional makeup, leaving dark, ugly streaks of mascara running down her cheeks and dripping onto her silk blouse. "My car is gone. My house is gone. My husband is going to jail for a very long time. I do not have a single dollar to my name. I cannot survive out there in the real world. I do not know how to be poor. You have hundreds of millions of dollars sitting in those trust accounts. You own half the commercial real estate in the city. Just give me $1 million. Please, Nia. Just $500,000. It is nothing to you. It is pocket change. Give me enough to get a nice apartment and a reliable car, and I swear on my life I will never bother you again. I will leave you alone forever, please. We are sisters." The absolute audacity of her begging was genuinely breathtaking. Less than a month ago, she had stood on the front porch of our parents' mansion, wearing expensive silk pajamas, and laughed directly in my face while I stood shivering in a freezing rainstorm. She had watched her husband throw my belongings into a flooded rose garden without a single ounce of pity. She had told me to figure it out when her credit card was declined at the luxury boutique. She had gleefully threatened to steal Big Mama's house from me just to fund her fake glamorous lifestyle. And now, kneeling in the dirt on the floor of my penthouse, she expected me to write her a massive check simply because we shared the exact same DNA. I sat back in my high-backed leather chair. I looked at the woman crying on the floor, and I felt a profound, overwhelming sense of closure. The heavy, invisible chains of family obligation that had bound me and choked me for 35 years simply dissolved into thin air. I owed her absolutely nothing. "Stand up, Charmaine," I said, my voice completely devoid of any warmth or sibling affection. She sniffled loudly, wiping her running nose with the back of her trembling hand. She slowly pushed herself up off the hardwood floor, her eyes wide and desperate, clinging to the faint, pathetic hope that her dramatic tears had actually worked. She looked at me with the eager, greedy anticipation of a spoiled child waiting for a massive reward. I reached down into the side compartment of my designer leather tote bag, resting next to my chair. My fingers brushed against a crisp, smooth paper envelope. I pulled it out and placed it gently onto the exact center of the mahogany desk. Charmaine's eyes instantly locked onto the envelope. Her breathing hitched in her throat. In her delusional, desperate mind, she had already decided exactly what was inside. She thought it was a certified cashier's check. She thought I was going to buy her a new life, a new condo, a new car, and set her up with a massive trust fund because she had managed to squeeze out a few tears and say the magic word, "Sister." "Take it," I instructed calmly. Charmaine practically lunged forward. Her trembling fingers snatched the envelope off the desk with incredible speed. She did not even bother to say thank you. She just ripped the top of the paper open with frantic, animalistic greed. She reached inside, her eyes wide and shining with the anticipation of instant financial salvation. She pulled the contents out of the envelope. It was not a certified check. It was not a thick bundle of cash. It was not a deed to a luxury condo in Buckhead. It was a single, brightly colored, unscratched $10 lottery ticket. Charmaine stood completely frozen. Her brain entirely stopped functioning. She stared at the cheap, flimsy piece of cardboard resting in the palm of her shaking hand. She flipped it over, looking at the barcode on the back, desperately searching for the joke. searching for the real money hidden inside the folds of the paper. She looked up at me, her face a mask of absolute paralyzing confusion. "What is this?" Charmaine whispered, her voice cracking, her greedy anticipation rapidly curdling into sheer horror. "This is a lottery ticket." I smiled. It was a cold, sharp, and perfectly satisfied smile. "That is exactly what it is," I replied softly, leaning forward and resting my chin on my folded hands. "It is the exact same $10 lottery ticket you and your mother thought was an appropriate substitute for respect, love, and basic human decency on Thanksgiving Day. You handed me a piece of trash while you danced around a stolen luxury car and you told me to be grateful." No, Charmaine gasped, dropping the torn envelope onto the floor, as if it had suddenly caught fire. "You cannot do this. You cannot just leave me with nothing. I am your sister. You told me to figure it out, Charmaine." I reminded her, throwing her exact words directly back in her face. "You told me that my poverty was a mindset. Your husband told me that the universe punishes people who do not invest in themselves. So consider this my ultimate investment in your personal growth." I stood up from the executive desk. I smoothed down the front of my tailored suit, towering over her, radiating the absolute authority of a woman who had completely conquered her demons and reclaimed her life. "Happy Thanksgiving, Charmaine," I said, my voice echoing with absolute brutal finality in the silent room. Bootstraps right. Charmaine's legs gave out again. She collapsed back onto the polished hardwood floor, clutching the $10 lottery ticket in her fist, screaming in sheer, unadulterated agony as the reality of her total destruction finally consumed her. Elaine lunged forward, her perfectly manicured hands reaching desperately across the polished mahogany desk. The sheer, unadulterated panic in her eyes was almost visceral as she tried to grab my arm, her voice tearing into a hysterical, high-pitched scream. "Nia, you cannot just leave us like this!" she shrieked, her expensive designer rings flashing under the recessed lighting. "We are your family. We are your blood. You have to fix this." Before her trembling fingers could even graze the fabric of my tailored suit, the atmosphere in the room shifted with lightning speed. The two massive, sharp-suited security directors, who had been standing silently by the frosted glass doors, moved with terrifying, coordinated precision. They stepped instantly between my mother and my desk, creating a literal, impenetrable iron boundary. One of the men firmly grabbed Elaine by the shoulders, physically forcing her to step back, while the other stepped protectively in front of me, his hand resting casually but purposefully near his waist. "Do not touch her!" The security director warned, his voice low, cold, and echoing with absolute, unquestionable authority. Elaine struggled weakly against the guard's grip, her sobs devolving into pathetic, breathless hiccups. Charmaine was still curled on the floor, clutching the worthless $10 lottery ticket to her chest, as if it were a physical lifeline, her entire body shaking violently as the reality of her total destruction finally consumed her. I stood up slowly from my high-backed leather chair. I looked at the two women who had spent my entire life making me feel incredibly small, unwanted, and inadequate. For 35 years, I had carried the heavy, suffocating weight of their expectations. I had drained my savings to fund their lies, swallowed my pride to keep their peace, and stood in the freezing rain hoping for a single ounce of their conditional love. But looking down at them, now stripped of their stolen money and their fake social status, I realized I did not feel an ounce of anger anymore. The burning resentment that had fueled my meticulous revenge was completely gone. In its place was a profound, overwhelming sense of absolute freedom. "Escort them out of my building," I instructed the security detail, my voice calm and perfectly steady, "and permanently revoke their access to the lobby. They are no longer welcome on any property owned by November Equities." The security guards moved efficiently. One hauled Charmaine up from the hardwood floor by her arm, ignoring her dramatic, hysterical wailing. The other firmly guided Elaine toward the heavy glass doors. My mother looked back over her shoulder one last time, her tear-streaked face a mask of absolute paralyzing disbelief. She opened her mouth, desperately trying to find the magic words that would somehow undo the catastrophic damage she had caused, but the heavy doors swung shut before she could utter a single syllable. The silence that rushed back into the executive boardroom was heavy, absolute, and utterly beautiful. I walked slowly away from the mahogany desk and stepped up to the massive floor-to-ceiling glass windows. I looked out over the sprawling sunlit Atlanta skyline. The city was a chaotic maze of concrete and ambition, but from 50 stories up it looked perfectly peaceful. I had won. The toxic empire my father had built on a foundation of lies and stolen charity funds was completely dismantled. The federal authorities were already aggressively seizing his remaining assets, and the local news stations were undoubtedly preparing to run the scandalous story of the disgraced megachurch pastor by the evening broadcast. But my victory was not just about destroying their lives. It was about reclaiming the legacy they had tried so hard to ruin. Big Mama's historic Victorian estate was no longer a pawn in my father's manipulative games. I had already instructed my legal team to transfer the deed to a newly formed nonprofit foundation. We were actively converting the massive, beautiful property into a fully funded high-end shelter and resource center for displaced young women. It would be a safe haven for girls who had been thrown out, abandoned, and told they were worthless by their own families. Big Mama's true legacy of unconditional love and protection was finally going to be honored. As for the sprawling megachurch, I had absolutely no intention of keeping it closed. I had already reached out to the deacon board anonymously, providing them with the necessary funds to cover the embezzled money and clear the predatory debts. The building would reopen next month under the leadership of a completely new Honest Community First Board of Directors. The toxic, narcissistic reign of Pastor David was permanently replaced by a genuine commitment to serving the congregation he had so callously exploited. I reached out and pushed open the heavy glass door leading to my private outdoor terrace. The warm, late afternoon breeze washed over me, carrying the faint, distant hum of the city traffic below. I stepped out onto the pristine concrete, breathing in the air of a life I truly, completely owned. I was no longer the scapegoat. I was no longer the obedient, terrified daughter waiting for scraps of affection. I was the architect of my own destiny. Sometimes the universe violently strips away your family to show you that you were always meant to stand alone and stand taller. The people who were supposed to protect you are often the exact same people standing squarely in the way of your ultimate blessing. Have you ever realized that the people tearing you down were actually the ones holding you back from your true potential? Have you ever had to walk away from toxic blood to find your real freedom? Tell me your story in the comments below. If this journey resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories of resilience, boundaries, and claiming your power. Thank you for listening. Keep standing tall.